What if the legends of valor and chivalry are nothing more than the polished bones of a reality drenched in blood and betrayal? The medieval battlefield was not a romantic tapestry woven with gallant knights, it was a savage cauldron of chaos, where honor died before the first arrow flew. Picture the stench of sweat and iron, where the clash of swords played a macabre symphony, and the ground drank deep of the fallen's crimson. Forget tales of knights in shining armor, this is the gritty truth, the spine-chilling account of how humanity danced with death. What does it take to stand on the precipice of oblivion, your heart pounding like a war drum, while the world around you erupts in a cacophony of screams and steel? Think of Agincourt, where muddy fields turned into graveyards for the overconfident. The English longbowmen unleashed a storm of arrows, like a vengeful god raining destruction upon oblivious foes. A single quiver, a single moment, and history pivoted. They say fortune favors the bold, but what of those who never saw the blade that cut them down? This isn't just history, it's an unholy rite of passage where survival hinged on a flickering candle of luck. Every battle was a gamble, sometimes you won, often you lost. The stakes? Your very soul. Ever heard of the Battle of Totun? A snowstorm of blood, where men fought not just for land or glory, but for the sheer thrill of carnage. The battlefield resembled a grotesque painting, splattered with the vibrant colors of life extinguished. Legends were born in the midst of horror, humor became a coping mechanism for those who stared death in the face and laughed, with dark mirth at the absurdity of it all. Consider this, what would the warriors of yore think of today's trivia nights? My lord, I slew 3 men before breakfast, and you can't even answer a pop culture question. They'd raise their tankards and toast to the absurdity of our sanitized existence. Yet, beneath the laughter lies a deep well of dread, like the sudden chill when you realize the door creaked behind you, and you're not alone. The true tales of these relentless confrontations are not for the faint-hearted. They're the stories that make your skin crawl and your pulse race. Blood-soaked banners flapping in the wind, the smell of burning flesh mingling with the rotting earth, a horror show that makes your worst nightmares seem like a sunny picnic. Who were the real heroes? The ones that charged into the fray, or the ones who hid behind the lines, praying their fate wouldn't be sealed by a misguided swing of a sword? You've only scratched the surface. The more you learn, the more you'll wish you hadn't. What shadows linger in these ancient tales? What gruesome revelations await? The truth waits behind the curtain, whispering in a voice that sends shivers down your spine. How savage can humanity be when survival is on the line? Welcome to a world where valor is a mask, and beneath it lies the raw, unfiltered chaos of existence. Prepare yourself, once you step into the fray, there's no turning back. The sunlight clawed through the heavy mist, revealing a battlefield stained with the colors of despair. It was a day like no other, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the choking cries of men swallowed by chaos. A distant horn blared, its sound hanging in the air, a ghastly harbinger of the storm about to unleash its fury. I remember my heart racing, the rhythm of war echoing in my ears like the beating of a war drum, a warning of the dance with death that awaited us all. I stood among the soldiers, fear palpable as it curled around my throat. Harold Godwin's son, the last Anglo-Saxon king, his face set in grim determination, his eyes darting across the field like a hawk surveying its territory. Memories of his youth, a time of laughter and feasting, drifted through my mind. But today, he was a man transformed, a lion on the edge, ready to defend his realm against the tide of Norman steel. And yet, deep within him, doubt clawed at his resolve. Will I be the last king of England? He must have wondered, the question like a shadow creeping into the light of his bravery. Across the field, William of Normandy, the conqueror, loomed like a dark cloud promising tempest. His armor, a flicker of silver against the grimy landscape, betrayed nothing. I watched him, and I could feel the weight of his ambition pressing down on my chest. He was not just a man but a force of nature, a tempest determined to bend the world to his will. I remembered the tales of his youth, whispers of a boy raised in uncertainty, transformed into a tyrant by the fires of desire. William was a man with scars etched into his soul, scars that had birthed a relentless hunger for power. As the armies readied themselves, I could see the tension crackling in the air, a hair trigger waiting to snap. I remember clenching my sword, its hilt slick with sweat, my fingers trembling as I thought of my family, of my mother's tear-streaked face, begging me not to fight, not to die on this cursed ground. But duty bound me, chained my heart to Vela. The faces of my brothers in arms, steadfast and resolute, gave me strength. We were bound together by desperation, each of us a thread in a tapestry of fate, woven tightly by fear and hope. And then it began. The sound of clashing steel, a symphony of chaos that echoed through the ages. I remember the screams, the visceral cries of men meeting their end, their voices swallowed by the earth. Harold's men surged forward like a tidal wave, a desperate counter to the ruthless force bearing down upon us. In that moment, time fractured. I saw the dust rise, thick and choking, swirling around us like a living entity, a ghost of the lives that had been lost before us, whispering tales of valor, of cowardice, of glory. In the midst of battle, I caught a glimpse of Harold again. He fought like a man possessed, each swing of his axe a declaration of defiance. But as I watched him, I could not shake the feeling that the gods were not on his side. An arrow whistled through the air, a dark omen. It struck him, a cruel twist of fate, the embodiment of all his doubts and fears made manifest. I remember the gasp that escaped my lips as he stumbled, the world around me collapsing into silence, a hushed gasp that echoed through the battlefield. As Harold fell, I felt the ground quake beneath me, the collective heart of England shattering with him. The soldiers around me faltered, uncertainty blooming like poison in the pit of my stomach. We had believed in Harold, believed in his vision for a united England, a land free from the shadows of tyranny. But as William advanced, his face a mask of unyielding ambition, I understood that we were merely pieces on a chessboard, and he was the player, relentless, calculated. I remember the clash of swords but also the quiet moments in between, the fleeting glances exchanged between men who had once laughed over ale and dreams. Friends turned to ghosts before my eyes, shadows of who they had been just hours before, and I felt the weight of their loss engulf me. Each death was a dagger to my heart, a reminder of the fragility of life, of the dreams that lay scattered like leaves in the autumn wind. And then the tide turned. The Normans, their discipline honed like blades, surged forward, a wave of determination that swept away our hopes. I fought like a man possessed, fueled by rage and despair, but even I could feel the inevitability of our defeat. The world spun around me, a cacophony of violence and anguish. William's men were relentless, pushing us back, their cries a mix of triumph and fury. But amid the chaos, I found a moment of clarity. I saw the future unfolding before me, a world where William would reign, where the dreams of a united England would turn to ashes. My heart broke as I envisioned the faces of my loved ones, lost to the tides of time. What would they do without me? With every fiber of my being, I wanted to fight, to claw back what was ours, but I was merely one soul in a storm of fury. And then it happened, a blinding moment of clarity, or perhaps madness. As William raised his sword high, the sun glinting off its edge like a star fallen from the sky, I knew this was not just a battle for land, it was a battle for the soul of our people. In that heartbeat, time froze. I grasped the weight of history pressing down upon us all, the echoes of our ancestors reverberating in the very air we breathed. But as I stood there, heart pounding, the world around me faded into a swirling blur. The cries of the fallen mingled with the clangor of battle, and I knew, this was not merely the end, it was the beginning of something darker, a new chapter written in blood. And I, a mere pawn in this grand game, could do nothing but watch as the shadows of history swallowed us whole. In those final moments, I felt the pulse of time itself, an endless cycle of ambition, loss, and rebirth. Night would fall, the stars would witness our tragedy, and I became one with the ghosts of the fallen, forever intertwined in the fabric of this new world. The Battle of Hastings was just the beginning, a whisper of the storm yet to come, and as darkness draped the land, I realized that the true conquest lay not in victory or defeat but in the scars we carried, the memories etched into our very souls. The air hung thick with the acrid scent of sweat and blood, a metallic tang that clung to your throat with every shallow breath. Night cloaked the besieged city of Ange like a shroud, concealing the desperate whispers of its defenders and the fierce roars of the men outside its walls. I stood there, heart pounding, as the stars whispered tales of lost hopes, hidden in the shadows of the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of bloodshed. Somewhere in that darkness, a lone torch flickered, its flame dancing like a dying spirit, illuminating the faces of those who fought not just for land, but for their very souls. God wills it, they chanted, but what did it mean? I remembered a time when faith felt like a warm embrace, but here, under the weight of fear and despair, it was a weight pressing down, suffocating hope. I could see Pierre, a man with weary eyes that had seen too many horrors. He clutched a sword that seemed almost too heavy for him, each swing a silent plea for it to be over, the battle, the suffering, the endless cycle of blood spilling on stones that once echoed with laughter. "Will we ever see home again?" he murmured, his voice a fragile thread in the cacophony of battle cries. Shadows stretched and writhed around us, blending with the despair as his question lingered in the air, heavy and unyielding. I wanted to tell him that there would be a day when we would sit by a fire, exchanging stories of valor and foolhardiness. But the truth froze on my lips, caught in the web of uncertainty that had ensnared our hearts. And then there was Judith, fierce and unyielding, eyes aflame with a tumultuous mix of rage and fear. She fought beside us, her hands calloused and stained, a testament to her determination. The battlefield was not merely a ground for men, it was hers as well. She wielded her dagger like a lifeline, each thrust a rebellion against a fate that sought to bind her. "We are not mere pawns," she would often shout, a battle cry that sent shivers rippling through the ranks. But even her unrelenting spirit faltered as the siege dragged on, hopelessness creeping into her veins like poison. "I remember the stories of the brave," she would say, staring into the distance as if seeking answers in the void. "But where are they now? Where is the glory?" The noble knights, once revered for their sacred vows, now seemed like ghosts, their valor drowned in the ocean of despair. The walls of Anch loomed above us, ancient and unyielding, a silent witness to our folly. We were not the first to lay siege to these stones, nor would we be the last. The city had stories woven into its very fabric, tales of battles won and lost, of heroes who had become shadows. And now, we, too, were caught in this relentless tapestry, threads of our lives fraying with every day that passed under the relentless sun. The days stretched into endless hours. I remember the sound, the echoes of swords clashing, the cries of the wounded, but even louder was the silence that followed. We fought not just against the men on the walls, but against our own fears, our own doubts. "Is this what we have become?" I whispered to Pierre one night, as we huddled together, sharing warmth in the chill of despair. "What price for our faith?" He didn't answer. Perhaps he couldn't. Instead, we sat in silence, the weight of the night pressing down, an unspoken acknowledgement of what we were losing. I could see the shadows of trees against the moonlight, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, grasping at the darkness that threatened to consume us. Suddenly, a horn blared, sharp and piercing, slicing through the heavy air. Our hearts leaped, a surge of adrenaline coursing through our veins. Judith was already on her feet, the fire in her eyes igniting a spark of hope. "It's time," she cried, and the men around us stirred, their spirits momentarily lifted. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw the flicker of doubt beneath the flame. What if this was another illusion, another cruel twist of fate? What if we rushed into a death trap, our hopes dashed against the stones once more? "Follow me," she shouted, leading the charge toward the city gates, her voice a beacon in the dark. And we followed, not from courage, but from the desperate longing for liberation, both from the siege and from the gnawing doubts that had taken root in our hearts. The world exploded around us. Arrows rained down like deadly rain, piercing the night, and the clang of metal on metal filled my ears, drowning out reason. In that maelstrom of chaos, I saw Pierre fall, a gasp torn from his lips as he crumpled to the ground, and my heart seized. "No!" The word tore from my throat, raw and primal, a plea to the universe that felt futile. Judith turned back, her fierce resolve breaking under the weight of reality. "We can't leave him." Panic twisted her features, the warrior cracked under the strain of the moment. "We can't." But even as she spoke, the horrors pressed in, the shadows thickening around us, and I knew, deep down, that hope was slipping through our fingers like sand. With fire in our hearts, we surged toward him, but the tumult swallowed us whole, faces, colors, screams melded into a chaotic tide. And then I was struck by the realization, a chill creeping from my spine to my bones. It was not just the enemy we were fighting. It was despair, fear, and the haunting echoes of our own hearts. The battle raged, but somewhere in the chaos, the hope we clung to began to fracture, the siege of Anj becoming not just a fight against the walls, but against the very essence of our souls. Hold fast! I heard someone shout, but the words were lost in the storm of emotion that surged through us. I felt the pulse of the city beneath my feet, a living entity that knew our pain and our fear. Were we to become another chapter in its long history of sorrow? The world spun, and I remember the faces, their pain, their fear, their hope. Was it too late? The city loomed before us, a fortress of despair, but something deeper stirred within me, a flicker of defiance and the unyielding belief that we could change our fate. I could almost hear the heartbeat of the cosmos, urging us forward, reminding us that we were not just soldiers but dreamers, rebels against the darkness. And as the night deepened, I realized the battle had only just begun. The sun hung low in the sky, a molten orb casting a dim orange glow over the battlefield. The air was thick with the acrid scent of sweat and blood, the ground trembling beneath the weight of countless boots marching to an uncertain fate. Here, in this dark landscape of dust and despair, the heart of a mighty empire beat its last raspy breaths. I felt it, a pulse of fear, a vibration of anger, a thunderous rhythm that echoed in my bones. I remember the moment he stumbled, General Romanos Diogenes, his face a mask of determination cracked by the terror of what lay ahead. The battlefield stretched before him, a dark ocean of chaos. He was a man caught between the splendor of command and the cold reality of impending defeat. I could see the desperation flickering in his eyes like the dying embers of a once great fire. He was not just a general, he was a man haunted by the shadows of his own decisions, a reluctant leader floundering in the waves of history crashing down upon him. To the east, the Seljuk Turks surged like a tide, fierce and relentless, led by the cunning Alp Arslan, whose laughter felt like a serpent coiling tighter around Romanos's heart. I could almost hear the whispers of the wind carrying tales of glory and conquest, promises laced with the venom of betrayal. Alp Arslan was not merely a warrior, he was a harbinger of change, a storm ready to swallow the remnants of a crumbling empire. Hold fast! Romanos roared, yet his voice faltered like a dying echo. For the empire. But what empire? The Byzantines were already ghosts, clinging desperately to a past that eluded them. I remember the soldiers around him, faces twisted in fear and determination. They were boys, really, thrust into a maelstrom of politics and power, their youth snuffed out like candles in a gale. Then there was Maria, a nurse whose hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of sorrow. She moved through the wounded, her heart a heavy stone, each breath filled with the cries of men caught between life and death. I remember her whispering prayers, each word a thread weaving hope into the despair. Stay with me, she murmured, cradling a soldier's head, her tears mingling with the dirt on his brow. In her eyes, I saw the reflection of every broken dream and unfulfilled promise, a haunting beauty that resonated deep within the chaos. As the first arrows rained down like dark meteors, the air split with the sound of war. Each thud against flesh and bone was a drumbeat of doom. I could feel the ground shaking beneath the weight of history, the crushing inevitability of failure looming like a storm cloud. Romano shouted commands, his voice a desperate plea against the rising tide of menacing foes. Form ranks! Protect the flank! But the cries of his men were drowned out by the cacophony of chaos. In the distance, the shadows of the mountains loomed, witnesses to the unfolding tragedy, guardians of secrets long buried. I remember how the sun dipped lower, casting long fingers of darkness over the field. Every heartbeat felt heavy, each second stretching into eternity. The warriors charged, a frenzy of life and death, a gruesome ballet played out against the backdrop of an unforgiving sky. Maria, still moving among the injured, caught a glimpse of the turmoil beyond the makeshift tents. Her heart raced, not just with the fear of losing those she fought to save, but with the realization that the very fabric of their world was unraveling. She saw men fall, collapsing under the weight of their own valor, and it struck her deeply, a terror that clawed at her insides. She could not save them all. The thought pressed against her chest like an iron vice, and she struggled, wrestling with the knowledge that her efforts were but a drop in an endless ocean of suffering. I remember the moment Romano's met Alp Arslan, their eyes locking in a clash of wills. It was more than a battle of swords, it was a collision of ideologies, the weight of empires resting on their shoulders. "Yield," Alp Arslan called out, a serpent's hiss laced with triumph. Romanos, blooded and battered, refused. "I will not. For Byzantium." The world hung in the balance, a fragile thread ready to snap. But what was Byzantium now? A fading echo, a memory of brilliance. I felt the despair seep into the ground, pooling like the blood of the fallen. The cries of the dying mingled with the whispers of history, and I could almost hear the ghosts of those who had come before, the wise, the foolish, the valiant, and the cowardly. All were trapped in this moment, this nexus of fate. With a sudden roar, the tide turned. The Seljuks surged forward, a wave of destiny crashing against the remnants of Romanos' army. Men fell like autumn leaves, their lives extinguished in a heartbeat. The cries grew louder, more frantic, a symphony of terror that surged through the air, wrapping around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I remember the moment Maria knelt beside a fallen soldier, his life slipping away like sand through an hourglass. "Please, hold on," she begged, but her voice was lost in the chaos, drowned out by the cries of despair. She felt the weight of her helplessness pressing down, a burden heavier than any armor. As she looked into his eyes, she saw the fear, the longing for life, and it shattered her heart into 1,000 pieces. And in that moment, she realized, this battle was not merely a fight for land or power, it was a fracture in the very essence of who they were. The air was thick with the scent of iron and fear, the ghosts of the past swirling around them like a shroud. Romanos, trapped in the storm of his own making, felt the weight of history pressing down, an anchor dragging him into the depths. "What have I done?" he whispered, but the winds of fate offered him no solace, only the howling reminder of the choices that had led him to this ruin. As shadows danced across the battlefield, the sun wept, its light dimming in sympathy for the souls lost. I felt it, a profound sadness wrapping around me like the chill of a winter night. The cries faded into silence. The empire was crumbling, the ideals once held high turning to dust, and all that remained was the haunting echo of dreams unfulfilled, lost in the chaos of a world forever changed. In that dark twilight, amidst the ruins of hope, Romanos and Maria stood on the precipice of despair, bound together by their shared fear and heartbreak. As the battle raged on, it became clear, this was not an end, but the beginning of a new darkness. Life would carry on, but in its wake would linger the shadows of what had once been, a haunting melody that would echo through the halls of history. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing on the chests of men as they gripped their swords, knuckles white, breath hitching in their throats. They stood on the precipice of chaos, an eerie silence hanging over the battlefield like a shroud, the kind of silence that makes the heart pound louder than any drum. The sun was a pale disk high above, casting an unforgiving light on the grim faces of the Scots, their eyes flickering with a mix of fear and fierce determination. It was 11:38, and the fate of a nation rested on the shoulders of a few brave souls. There was a boy among them, a mere lad named Aidan. He was not yet a man, barely old enough to wield a sword, but here he was, caught in the storm of war. His heart raced as he remembered his mother, her warm embrace, the way she soothed his nightmares with tales of heroes and valor. "Be brave, Aidan," she had whispered, her voice a haunting echo in his mind. But bravery was a different beast when the spectre of death loomed so close. The ground beneath him trembled, a reminder that the world was shifting, and the battle was coming. Nearby stood Sir John, a seasoned warrior whose iron-grey hair spoke of battles long fought and losses hard endured. He tightened his grip on his sword, his thoughts swirling like autumn leaves in a tempest. There was a darkness within him, a shadow cast by the lives he had taken, the friends he had lost. Each scar on his body told a story, but it was the one on his heart that ached the most. He had fought to protect the land he loved, yet here he was, ready to face the English, knowing full well that the line between protector and destroyer was razor thin. "For Scotland," he murmured, the words barely escaping his lips, a prayer and a curse all at once. And then there was the fearsome leader, William, known for his fiery spirit and relentless ambition. He was a lion among sheep, his presence commanding respect and dread in equal measure. His eyes blazed with a fierce light, but underneath that fire was a flicker of doubt. He had promised his men glory, but glory was a fickle mistress, often leading to untimely death. He felt the weight of their hopes on his shoulders, a burden that made him want to shout, to rage against the gods who toyed with their fates. This is not just a battle of steel, he thought, the word spiraling in his mind. It is a battle for our very souls. The distant sound of horns shattered the silence, a haunting call that signaled the approach of the English. Aidan's heart leaped into his throat. The ground reverberated with the march of armored feet, a relentless tide of men, all bearing down upon them with the fury of a storm. Time slowed, each second stretching out, heavy with inevitability. The weight of the moment pressed on Aidan's small frame. He couldn't escape the feeling that they were all just pawns in a greater game, mere shadows of what they hoped to be. "Remember me," he cried out, as if the universe could hear his plea. His voice was lost in the din, but he felt it, every heartbeat, every breath, echoing through the void. Fear clawed at him, and he thought of his mother again, of the warmth of home, of the sweet scent of baked bread that lingered in his memory. Would he ever taste it again? Would he return? The first clash came like thunder, the sound of metal ringing out, shrieking through the air. Aidan was swept up in the chaos, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He swung his sword, though it felt heavy in his hands, a weight that threatened to drag him down into the abyss. He fought not just for himself but for every soul who dared to dream of freedom. The faces of his comrades flashed before him, young men, old men, all caught in this wretched dance of death. Sir John fought beside him, his movements fluid and practiced. He was a whirlwind, a storm carved from the very fabric of battle. But even as he struck down foes, he felt the gnawing ache of loss. Each enemy he fell was a reminder of the humanity he was forced to extinguish. "I do this for you, my friends," he whispered, his voice breaking, the ghosts of his past rising like smoke around him. "I do this for Scotland." The chaos surged and ebbed like a tide driven by an unseen hand. William roared, rallying his men, his voice a clarion call amidst the cacophony. "For our land! For our kin!" But deep within, he felt the gnawing doubt clawing at his resolve. Was he leading them to glory, or to a grave? As the battle raged on, blood soaked the earth, mingling with the rain that began to fall, each drop a silent tribute to the lives lost. Aidan's breath came in sharp gasps, each inhale thick with the taste of iron and fear. He stumbled, his foot catching on something, and as he fell, the ground felt like a grave beneath him. He looked up, and for a moment, time stood still. In that fleeting heartbeat of eternity, he saw the faces of his comrades, their eyes wide with terror, their bodies mere vessels caught in a storm. He could feel the despair washing over him, a tide threatening to pull him under. "I want to go home," he thought, the words a desperate whisper in the deafening chaos. But there was no retreat, no escape. The battle pushed forward, a relentless force fueled by pride, pain, and loss. The cries of the wounded filled the air, a haunting symphony of agony. Sir John found himself surrounded, defending against a wave of enemies, each swing of his sword a desperate plea for survival. He fought as though he could carve a path through the darkness, as if each blow could erase the scars of his past. And William, emboldened by fury, charged forward, his heart pounding in time with the war drums. Yet even as he called for victory, he felt the weight of something darker looming, the possibility that victory might come at too high a cost. His vision blurred with the chaos, but he pushed on, the roar of battle echoing in his ears, his name rising in the chants of his men. The sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows lengthening, twisting like specters of the fallen. Blood and rain melded into a chilling pattern on the ground, a tapestry of valor and despair. In that moment, amidst the clash of swords and the cries of men, the very fabric of fate shifted, leaving them teetering on the edge of something vast and unknowable. In the eye of the storm, beneath the weight of steel and sorrow, they fought, not just for lands, not just for kings but for their very souls, for dreams etched into their hearts like the scars of war. Each moment was a heartbeat, a breath shared among those willing to stand against the tide. And as the shadows deepened, the true battle began, not just against each other, but against the darkness that threatened to consume them all. The air was thick with dust, a choking cloud that hung over the battlefield like a shroud, muffling the cries of men and the desperate whinnies of horses. I remember the sun, a merciless orb suspended in a pitiless azure sky, pouring down its fiery gaze upon us. The heat pressed against my skin, smothering me, as though the very earth conspired to roast us alive. All around, the landscape twisted into a cruel parody of life, a barren expanse of scorched rock and parched soil. It was here, on the desolate hills of Hat Tin, beneath that unrelenting sun, that destinies would shift, and legends would be born or broken. I see him, the mighty Saladin, poised like a hawk surveying its prey, his dark eyes glinting with resolve. Each breath he took seemed to hold the weight of his ancestors, of 1,000 whispered prayers and the burden of history. His heart beat a rhythm of defiance, a promise that the night would end in glory, or perhaps in blood. He was a man of contradictions, a warrior and a scholar, a figure painted in shades of honor and ambition. But today, as he gazed across the field at the encroaching Crusader forces, there was no room for nuance. Only the raw urgency of survival thrummed in the air, thickening the tension between his soldiers, who looked to him for the spark that would ignite their courage. And then there was the other side, Raymond of Tripoli, the embodiment of desperation wrapped in the drapes of nobility. His armor gleamed in the harsh light, a mere reflection of his fading hope. I remember the way despair clawed at him, a relentless spectre. Each step felt like walking through mud, each decision heavy with the consequences that could tip the scales toward doom. He longed for the sweet embrace of victory, yet the shadows danced menacingly at the edges of his vision. He could hear the murmurs of his men, their faces etched with fatigue, and he feared the futility of their stand against an enemy that thrived on their despair. Forward, he cried, although the word felt hollow, an echo against the vastness of the horizon. I remember the way it fell flat, as if the desert itself swallowed the command before it had a chance to resonate. Was it courage he felt or the last flicker of hope? The line between the two blurred in the sweltering heat, a maddening mirage that teased and taunted. In that moment, time slowed to a crawl. I could see the tension coiling in their bodies, the sweat glistening on their brows like dew on withering grass. There was a vulnerability in their strength, a paradox that spoke louder than swords clashing. Memories of home flickered in their eyes, images of laughter and love, of children playing in the fields, of mothers calling them to dinner. These were men snatched from the embrace of normalcy, thrust into chaos, and they bore the weight of their choices like boulders strapped to their backs. I remember the feeling of impending doom, a heavy blanket that pressed down on me. The Crusaders were trapped, encircled by the forces of Saladin, their water supplies dwindling like hope slipping through fingers. The tension was visceral, a serrated edge that sliced through the din of battle preparations. And as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers reaching for the last remnants of light, the air shimmered with the promise of bloodshed. "Can you hear them?" Raymond whispered to his closest confidants, his voice barely audible above the growing cacophony. "The drums of war." The sound was like a heartbeat, a relentless thumping that matched the rhythm of his own fear. They were not just the drums of their enemy, they were the harbingers of their own doom echoing back at them. Saladin, on the other hand, stood resolute, a commander in tune with the pulse of his soldiers. There was no arrogance in his stance, only a fierce determination that ignited the spirits of his men. "Today, we reclaim our honor," he declared, and in that moment, the world spun on the axis of his words. They were not mere soldiers, they were brothers, bound by a shared dream. His presence was magnetic, drawing them closer, fortifying their resolve even as the horizon darkened with the weight of inevitable confrontation. Then it began, chaos unleashed. The battlefield erupted like a volcano, raw emotion spilling forth like molten lava. Metal clashed against metal, the sound a cacophony that reverberated through the very bones of the earth. I can still hear it, the screams, the prayers, the guttural cries of men fighting for their lives. I felt the visceral pull of fear and rage, a glorious, terrifying dance that drew each soul into its fiery embrace. I remember running, feeling the ground shake beneath me, the heat of the day giving way to a chilling realization they were not just fighting for land or glory, but for the sanctity of their very existence. In that swirling chaos, Raymond's face contorted with determination, a man transformed by the crucible of war. "For our families," he roared, his voice almost lost in the tumult. "For our future." But in the depths of his heart, a quiet voice whispered, "But at what cost?" And then, amid the frenzy, I saw him, the moment that shattered everything, a flash of agony that would haunt my dreams. A crusader fell, his body crumpling like a broken doll, and time froze. The world narrowed to that single breath, the death rattle of a man who had once been whole. It echoed through the ranks, a chilling reminder of mortality. In that instant, I felt the weight of despair, the heavy hand of fate closing around my throat. This was not just a battle, it was a reckoning. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of crimson, it became clear that this would not be a day of heroes, only the relentless march of destiny, unyielding and unforgiving, as the shadows of men clashed beneath the watchful eyes of history. Saladin's forces surged forward like a tidal wave, relentless and unstoppable. I could hear the cries of the fallen, the lamentations that would echo through the ages, but they were drowned by the roar of victory that swelled among the ranks of those who dared to hope. I remember the spark in Saladin's eyes, the fire of triumph mingling with the sorrow of loss, a reminder that every victory demands a price. As the dust settled like a blanket over the slain, the battlefield transformed into a graveyard of dreams, the cries fading into a haunting silence. It whispered of the courage that had stood against despair, and of the profound, heart-wrenching truth that in this dance of battle, there were no true winners, only the echoes of lives lost, and the heavy burden of what was to come. The sun hung low over Winchester, smeared across the sky like a bruise, the air thick with dread. A breath caught in my throat as I pressed against the cool, damp stone of the keep, heart racing, every pulse echoing the distant thunder of hooves. The battlefield was alive, a cacophony of clashing metal, the cries of men caught between valor and terror. This moment, this very second, felt like an eternity, a fragile thread stretched thin across time, ready to snap. I remember the smell, the pungent tang of blood and sweat, the metallic taste of fear lingering in the back of my throat. It was a grim perfume, one that would haunt my dreams long after the sun had set on this day. I glanced at William, his face pale as the moonlight itself, eyes wide, flickering between hope and despair. He clutched his sword like a lifeline, knuckles white, breathing shallowly as if the very act of living was a burden too great to bear. I wanted to tell him it would be all right, but the words suffocated in my chest, choked by the chaos around us. He was my brother in arms, bound by blood and loyalty, yet the crown hung between us like a guillotine, sharp and merciless. Young and foolish, we had believed we could wrestle fate itself, that glory awaited us in the dust and smoke. But now, as the ground trembled beneath the weight of charging steeds, I felt the insidious creep of doubt worm its way into my heart. It was a treacherous dance, this fight for the English crown, a waltz of ambition and regret, of brotherhood and betrayal. And then there was Eleanor, distant like a flickering star in the night sky, her fate intertwined with ours but far more precarious. I had seen her, once, the fierce, unyielding spirit wrapped in a gown of silk, laughter spilling like sunlight from her lips, but now, her voice was drowned out by the clash of swords, a melody lost among the din. She had dared to dream beyond the constraints of her time, a queen whose heart beat fiercely against the chains of tradition. I remember the way she smiled, eyes alight with unquenchable fire, and how I had yearned to stand beside her, to be more than a mere soldier, to be a part of something grander. But dreams too often wither on the battlefield. I felt the weight of my choices pressing against my chest, a leaden cloak of guilt and longing. I wanted to run to her, to scream that I would fight for her right to rule, for the love that blossomed in shadows. Yet here I stood, sword in hand, the sounds of war urging me to drown out my heart's desperate pleas. A choice had to be made, loyalty or love, brotherhood or ambition. The moment hit like a sudden storm. A shriek sliced through the chaos, a cry, raw and primal, shuddering my very bones. It was a sound of a man meeting his end, a reminder that death was a constant companion here. I turned to William, my voice barely a whisper. "We cannot turn back now." The words hung between us like a fragile spider's web, holding the weight of our fears and our resolve. And then they came, shadows against the dying light, figures galloping forward, banners snapping in the wind like angry tongues. They were the men of King Stephen, a tide of steel and fury crashing against the walls we thought would hold, a tide that threatened to drown us all. I felt the icy grip of history ensnaring me, dragging me deeper into a swirl of anguish and anticipation. Each clash of steel felt like the tolling of a bell, each fall a reminder that we were pawns on this chessboard, our destinies entwined with the whims of those who played. Eleanor's laughter echoed in my mind, a haunting melody that tugged at my soul. I remember her spirit, fierce and unyielding, burning brighter than any crown. Yet as the battle raged on, that light flickered, dimmed by the darkness of this brutal contest. Would she find victory in the ashes we left behind, or would her dreams crumble like so many fallen warriors? The ground was slick beneath my feet, a vile reminder of the carnage that lay ahead. I gripped my sword tighter, a symbol of the bond between brother and sister, of hope and despair warring in my heart. William and I charged forward, but I felt his hesitation, a tiny crack in our bond, a fissure that threatened to widen with each step. We were not merely fighting for territory, we were battling against the very essence of our beings, our desires clashing like swords in the night. I remember the faces of the fallen, etched in my mind like a tapestry of agony, each one a story, a life snuffed out beneath the weight of ambition. I fought not just for survival, but for their forgotten dreams, their whispers of love and loyalty lost in the clamor of war. Each swing of my sword became a desperate plea, a cry for justice amid the ruin. I was lost in the frenzy, where every heartbeat echoed like a drum signaling an inevitable fate. And then, through the smoke and shadows, I saw her. Eleanor stood tall, unyielding against the tides of darkness, eyes aflame with determination. I remember the way the light caught her hair, a halo illuminating her fierce spirit, a beacon in this storm. My heart surged, could it be that she would emerge from this chaos, a queen forged in the fires of battle? In that fleeting moment, everything collided, the past, the present, the fragments of our shattered dreams all converging into one blinding truth. I fought not just for the crown, but for her, for the woman who dared to believe, who inspired us all to rise against the tide. In this maelstrom of chaos, I heard the whispers of those who had come before us, urging us to carry their hopes, to honor their sacrifices. The clash intensified, and I felt the world around me begin to fade, the battlefield a blur of color and sound. I could no longer distinguish friend from foe, every clash a desperate reminder of what was at stake. My soul screamed to reach out to Eleanor, to bridge the distance, but the tide of men surged around us, drowning out every thought of hope. And in that moment, I understood. The struggle for the English crown was never merely about power, it was a tangle of dreams, of love and loyalty interwoven with the cruel threads of fate. As the shadows lengthened, I knew we would fight to the bitter end, not just for the crown, but for the very essence of who we were. And so we charged, swords raised, hearts ablaze, into the swirling abyss of chaos, where victory and heartbreak danced a cruel waltz, echoing through the ages as the struggle for the English crown reached its horrifying crescendo. The sky crackled with an ominous grey, a heavy blanket of clouds that kissed the horizon with the promise of a storm. A chill seeped into the bones of every soldier huddled in their makeshift camp near Bouvines, where uncertainty gnawed at the edges of courage. I can still hear the leather of armor creaking, the soft whimpers of horses, the desperate prayers whispered like secrets in the dark. The air was thick with anxiety, each heartbeat echoing with the weight of impending doom. This was not just another clash of swords, this was the moment that would either save or shatter lives. God's wrath is upon us, muttered Hugh, his voice barely above a whisper, a tremor betraying the mask of bravado he tried so desperately to wear. Hugh, a knight of modest means, stood tall yet his eyes betrayed him. They were pools of uncertainty. This was his first battle, and the thought of dying in a muddy field, forgotten like so many before him, sent icy fingers crawling up his spine. "What if I don't return?" he said, and in that moment, I saw the flicker of a dream extinguished, the dream of a warm hearth, a loving smile, a life unmarked by bloodshed. "Shut your mouth," barked another soldier beside him, Bertrand, his voice a gruff storm. He was a seasoned warrior, a man hardened by years of strife, but even he felt the sting of nerves. "We fight for our king, for our lands. Do not let fear take root." But as he spoke, I noticed the way his hands trembled as they gripped his sword. Unseen ghosts danced before them, memories of friends lost, the stench of blood and fear that lingered long after the battle had ended. Each memory was a knife, twisting deeper into his heart. And then there was the spectre of King Philip II, looming like a distant thundercloud. His ambition was a palpable force, a living thing that consumed him. I could see it in the way he paced beneath the trees, his mind racing through plans while his soldiers buzzed like anxious bees around him. "We will crush them," he proclaimed, though I could sense an undercurrent of doubt in his voice. His dreams were stitched together with the thread of conquest, a tapestry of power that was as much a burden as it was a blessing. Each face of his men, each face like Hugh's and Bertrand's, represented the weight of his decisions. The sun began its descent, and shadows stretched long and dark, whispering warnings. I remember the moment everything changed, the heartbeat of fate pounding beneath the earth. The clash of steel filled the air, a symphony of chaos that drowned out the prayers. I remember the taste of dirt and iron, a heady mix that surged through the senses, a reminder of the fragility of life. The sky exploded with sound as men charged forward, their voices rising like a tempest, a cacophony of hope and desperation. "Betrayal is a deadly blade," Hugh shouted as he plunged into the fray, his eyes wide with terror and exhilaration. In that moment, he was no longer just a boy, he was a warrior, a tempest unleashed. But every thrust of his sword felt like an assault on his very soul, each blow a reminder of the price of survival. He fought not just for glory but for the dream of returning home, of laughter echoing through the halls, yet every swing felt like a betrayal to the innocence that lingered just out of reach. Bertrand was a force of nature, his sword singing through the air as if fueled by his own demons. He fought alongside Hugh, the younger man's fear a mirror to his own, and every swing was a fight against the ghosts of those who had fallen before him. "For honor," he roared, though the word felt hollow now, a shell of what it once meant. Honor was complicated, and today it danced a dark waltz with death. As he struck down a foe, his breath caught. Was it victory or loss that filled his lungs? The field was a hellscape, a morass of mud and blood and the sounds of agony that would haunt them long into the night. I remember the way the light shifted, a surreal glow illuminating the carnage, turning the scene into a grotesque painting, a blend of valor and despair. And then the tide began to turn. The enemy's formation shattered like glass, panic spreading like wildfire, and I could see it in their eyes, fear, the great equalizer. And yet, amid the chaos, I felt hope swell, the kind of hope that is born from desperation, fragile yet fierce. Through the fervor of battle, King Philip emerged, a lion among men, his voice rising above the din. "Push forward. We claim our destiny." His eyes blazed with fervor, yet I could see the flicker of doubt shadowing his resolve. The weight of leadership bore down on him like an anvil, the lives of his men dangling from the precarious balance between victory and defeat. Hugh could feel the energy shifting, the realization that this moment would haunt them forever. Would they be remembered as heroes or lost souls? As he fought, he caught sight of Bertrand, caught in a brutal struggle against two foes. Time slowed, an eternity of breath caught in his throat. Their eyes locked, it was a plea, a promise. "I will not let you fall," Hugh cried, charging forth, a bolt of lightning in the tempest. Bertrand's fate hung by a thread, the sword slicing dangerously close. "Do it," he shouted, desperation pouring from his voice, a raw edge that pierced the chaos. In that heart-stopping moment, everything hung suspended in time, the ground beneath them, the sky above, the very fabric of reality. And then, with a single swing, the battle shifted, the tide pulling them toward an uncertain dawn. The cries of victory mingled with the wails of the fallen, an anthem of survival woven into the fabric of the night. But even as triumph surged through the ranks, I could feel the weight of what it meant to survive. The ghosts of the lost would linger, and the scars would run deep. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle began to fade, I saw Hugh and Bertrand, two souls intertwined in a tapestry of fate. The weight of their choices hung heavy in the air, a reminder that in the end, victory and heartache often walk hand in hand. The world around them was forever altered, the shadows lengthening into something that would echo through time. And as the sun set, painting the horizon in hues of blood and gold, I knew this was not the end. The clock continued to tick, and within the silence that followed, the real battle was just beginning. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight that pressed down on the shoulders of every man standing on that blood-soaked field. I remember the moment vividly. The sun hung low, a molten orb bleeding orange across the horizon, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for France's ambitions. I could taste the iron scent of fear, the metallic tang of sweat and anxiety swirling in the air. Around me, the assembled men of Flanders shifted nervously, clutching their weapons like talismans, the smooth wood of their staves worn by countless battles, yet today felt different. This was the day we defied the crown. Jack, a blacksmith-turned-warrior, stood to my right. His knuckles were white, and I could see the fear etched deeply into the lines of his face. His heart pounded like the hammer he wielded, forging iron into tools of resilience, of rebellion. "They think we are nothing but peasants," he muttered, his voice a low growl, "but today they will know. We are not their cattle to be herded." I admired his passion, but deep down, I felt the shadow of doubt creeping in. What if our rebellion was a fool's errand? What if the French knights, those armored giants, crushed our spirit beneath their spiked boots? And then there was Margot, fierce and unyielding, her fiery spirit igniting the resolve in those around her. She was not just a woman, she was a storm, an unquenchable fire that had roared through the taverns of Bruges, rallying the townsfolk to arms. Yet, beneath her bravado, I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. "We fight for our homes, our families," she said, voice rising, almost drowning out the distant clatter of hooves and armor. But I feared her conviction might be a mask, a fragile facade cracking under the weight of impending doom. The ground trembled as the first wave of French knights thundered into view, their silver armor glinting ominously in the fading light. It was a sight that made my stomach churn, a wave of dread that rolled over me like a tide. Each knight, with their plume of feathers waving like maddened crows, symbolized the power and oppression of a distant king, yet they, too, were human. They had hearts, they had fears. Did they know the cost of their zeal for conquest? As the thunder of hooves grew louder, Jack gripped my shoulder. "We stand for our freedom. Remember why we are here." His voice pierced through the cacophony of my swirling thoughts. I could feel the pulse of our collective heart, a unified rhythm of terror and defiance. Each beat screamed for survival. I remembered the faces of my neighbors, their laughter echoing in the streets of Ypres, the way the children danced, blissfully unaware of the specter looming over us. The battle began like a tempest unleashed. Steel clashed against steel, piercing the air with shrieks that felt like the cries of lost souls. I swung my weapon, or a simple, crude pitchfork, against the polished blades of the French knights, each strike fueled by desperation. The chaos was an orchestra of death, a symphony of terror that wrapped around us like a shroud. I saw Jack throw himself into the fray, a madman possessed, striking down a knight with a ferocity I had never witnessed before. But I also saw him fall, the glint of a dagger sinking into his side, his scream swallowed by the roars of battle. My heart shattered, pieces scattering like the remnants of our hopes. And Margot, oh, Margot, with her wild hair whipping like flames in the wind, her spirit seemed to shine even brighter as the battle raged. But then, I saw her falter, her foot caught in the mud of the battlefield, her eyes wide with horror as a knight bore down upon her. Time slowed, my heart thudded painfully in my chest. Would I lose her, too? I lunged forward, adrenaline surging through my veins like wildfire, and I managed to shove her aside just as the knight's sword whistled through the air. She twisted away, but I could feel the cold steel slice through my flesh, pain erupting like a volcano. Yet, in that moment of agony, I felt something else, a rush of purpose, a realization that I was willing to fight not just for freedom, but for the people I loved. I remembered the laughter, the camaraderie, the dreams we had woven of a life unshackled from tyranny. I spat defiance into the face of the knight looming over me, my spirit ignited by the collective will of those around me. The battle surged around us, but in that chaotic dance of death, I found clarity. I saw Jacques fighting back against the tide, his spirit refusing to yield, despite the blood soaking the ground beneath him. I saw Margot, fierce and alive, rallying our brothers and sisters, igniting hope amidst despair. We were not just fighting men, we were fighting for the very essence of who we were. Each thrust, each parry, each life lost sharpened the resolve within me. The French may have been warriors born of noble blood, but we were forged in the fires of our struggles, of our dreams and our hopes. And in that crucible, we transformed from mere peasants to something greater, a force of nature, an unstoppable tide. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield, I felt the tide of our rebellion shift. With every fallen knight, with every cry of anguish, we gained ground. The clinking of armor, the cries of the wounded, the scent of blood, it all blended into an intoxicating melody, pushing us forward. Defiance burned in our chests, an unquenchable fire lighting the way through the darkness that threatened to consume us. Night fell, wrapping the battlefield in a cloak of uncertainty, but as I fought on, I held on to the hope of tomorrow. I remembered the laughter echoing through the town of Ypres, the dreams shared over warm ale in the taverns, and the sun rising over the cobbled streets. I knew we were fighting for more than survival, we were fighting for our very souls. And as the battle raged on, I realized, with every fiber of my being, that we would not go gently into that dark night. No, we would stand and fight, screaming our defiance into the face of destiny, as the battle of the golden spurs raged on, our spirits entwined in a tapestry of courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding belief in freedom. The morning air was thick with smoke and the bitter tang of fear, a shroud that clung to every man, every blade of grass, every breath. I remember the sound, like teeth grinding together, the hushed murmurs of soldiers, the clinking of armor, the shuddering of hearts. I stood there, just a boy, my fingers trembling around the coarse wood of my longbow, its string taut with expectation. The world felt compressed, as if time itself held its breath, waiting to unleash chaos. A few paces away, Sir Edward, the proud knight with scars that told stories of glory, stared into the distance, his knuckles white as he gripped the hilt of his sword. He was a man driven by honor, but beneath that polished exterior lay a tempest of doubt. I could see it in his eyes, the flickering shadows of what lay ahead at Crecy. "We will stand, boy," he said through clenched teeth, his voice like gravel. "Or we will fall." I remember how his gaze darted to the horizon where the French banners danced like phantoms, mocking our resolve. They were an army of many, their numbers vast, a sea of steel and color that washed over the land, threatening to drown us in their might. The weight of it pressed against my chest. Did we even have a chance? Then, there was Thomas, my dearest friend, the only one who dared to share the secrets of his heart in the midst of war. He was clad in armor that seemed too large for his lanky frame, his hazel eyes wide with a mix of terror and determination. "I've heard tales," he whispered, the words quaking like leaves in the wind. "Tales of the longbow's power. They say it can pierce through steel, through armor. We hold the skies in our hands." But I saw through the bravado, we were just boys playing at soldiers, wrestling with fears that kept us awake at night. I remembered the way he laughed under the stars while the world turned dark around us, how we were convinced that bravery was as simple as drawing a bowstring. Yet now, as the sun crested the horizon, a blood-red orb that filled the sky with dread, I felt our innocence slipping away like sand through trembling fingers. The silence stretched ominously, and I closed my eyes, letting memories swirl around me, the laughter of children, the scent of fresh bread, the warmth of my mother's embrace. But those memories fluttered away, chased off by the clanging of swords and the cries of men. The battlefield was waking, and so was death. "Ready," roared the commanding voice of King Edward, a sound that cut through the haze of fear. A shiver coursed through me. I blinked back tears, my heart racing, each beat a reminder of the choices we faced, to fight or to flee, to embrace fate or succumb to despair. The command rang out again, "Loose!" And suddenly, chaos erupted. Arrows streaked across the sky, sharp and glinting like stars falling from heaven, each one carrying the weight of our hopes and fears. I knocked my arrow, the wood cool against my fingertips, and drew back the string with every ounce of strength I could muster. I could hear Sir Edward bellowing orders, but they were lost in the cacophony, drowned out by the war cries that echoed like demons in my ears. I let my arrow fly, watching as it arced through the air, a tiny comet of fate. The world slowed for an instant. It struck true, piercing flesh, and the scream of a French soldier hovered in the air, a haunting melody of agony that pierced through the chaos. My stomach lurched, a mix of triumph and horror, and I felt the weight of death settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Again! I heard Thomas shout, his voice raw and fierce. I turned to him, and his face was aflame with a wild intensity. There was darkness in his eyes, the kind that had been birthed in the womb of fear. "We can win this, Ewan. We hold the future in the palm of our hands." "But what future?" I thought, the words curling in my mind like smoke. I could see the bodies piling up, the ground soaking in blood, and with each arrow loosed, my heart screamed in protest. Each flight of the longbow felt like an elegy for the fallen. The battle surged and crashed like waves against the shore, and I lost track of time, every moment a lifetime, every breath a battle cry. The sun climbed higher, casting shadows that danced grotesquely over the fallen, a macabre ballet of life and death. I saw Sir Edward, fierce and relentless, his blade a whirlwind of destruction, yet beneath it all I glimpsed the cracks in his armor, the toll of what it meant to kill, to survive amid such horror. "Ewan," he roared, his voice almost lost in the din. "Aim! Fire!" And I did, over and over, my fingers raw, my heart pounding like a war drum, each shot a desperate plea for survival, for meaning in the madness. My mind flickered to the whispers of the night, the dreams of glory that felt like ashes in my mouth. There was no glory here, only pain, only loss. But within the storm, I also felt a peculiar thrill, a rush of power as the longbow sang through the air, an echo of my ancestors who had held such weapons before me. I was part of something greater than myself, threading the needle of history with every arrow I released. And with that thought, a flicker of hope ignited within me, a fragile flame amidst the darkness, nudging me to confront my fears. And then I saw him, a figure in the throng of chaos, a French knight, armor shining, his eyes locked onto mine. Time froze, the world blurred, and all that existed was us, two souls on a collision course. I could see the challenge in his gaze, the fire of battle mirrored in the depths of his being. I knew he would come, I felt it in my bones. I closed my eyes for one brief heartbeat, conjuring the laughter of childhood, the warmth of friendship, the promise of tomorrow. And then I stepped into the fray, the longbow drawn tight against my chest, ready to face whatever fate awaited me, ready to carve my name into the annals of history, or to sink into the shadows of oblivion. In that moment, the universe collapsed into itself, a swirling vortex of emotion, pain, and the indomitable spirit of man. The battle was far from over, it was only just beginning, a relentless tide that would pull us further into the unknown. I could hear the echoes of everything that had led us here, and I knew, with a shivering certainty, that the rise of the longbows would change everything. The air was thick with the scent of blood and fear, the kind of dread that clung to the skin like a second layer, a grim reminder that death was lurking behind every tree. It was the sort of quiet that makes your heart race, an eerie lull before the storm. And then, the clash of steel erupted, swords meeting shields, like thunder rolling across a starlit sky. The ground trembled beneath the weight of men, a chaos of shouting voices, a cacophony of agony and valor. I was there, lost in the whirlwind of it all, a mere shadow among giants, and it felt like the universe was holding its breath. I remember Etienne, a young knight with eyes like molten gold, fiercely determined, almost foolish in his bravery. He charged forward, sword raised high, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. For France, he shouted, voice cracking with adrenaline, a battle cry that echoed across the field, yet it seemed so small against the overwhelming roar of the impending storm. I felt the heat radiating from him, that intoxicating mix of hope and desperation. He glimpsed the future through a haze of blood, a future where he would be more than just a footnote in history. And then there was King Jean, the head of this warring tapestry, whose dignity was as fragile as parchment. I could see him, a regal figure clad in armor, the weight of his crown resting heavily upon his brow, faintly shining beneath the sun like a beacon of hope and despair. Would it be the end of his reign today? The thought clutched at my insides. He was a man driven by pride, by the weight of his ancestors. But as arrows flew overhead, plunging into flesh, I saw the flicker of doubt in his steely gaze. I felt the crack in his resolve, it throbbed through the air like a heartbeat, resonating deep within me. In the midst of chaos, shadows loomed, each one a spectre of choices made and unmade. Men fell, their bodies crumpling like forgotten dreams. I could almost hear their whispers, the echoes of lives lived in moments of laughter and sorrow, now reduced to mere memories buried within the earth. I remember thinking how absurd it was, that one day you could be sharing wine with friends, and the next, you lay lifeless in a field, cut down by fate's indifferent hand. I found humor in that, dark and twisted, like the humor of a jester in a king's court. Etienne charged forward, fearless, his heart pounding like a drumbeat of rebellion. I wanted to scream for him, to pull him back into the safety of shadows, but the words were caught in my throat. Why do you fight? I wanted to shout. What is worth this madness? This bloodshed? But my voice was drowned out by the screams, the clash of metal, and the relentless roar of war. King Jean, too, moved through the fray with a regal grace, but there was no glory in his steps. He was no longer the proud ruler, he was a man grasping at the fraying threads of his kingdom. Each swing of his sword felt like a desperate attempt to hold back the tide of chaos threatening to engulf him. He fought not just for France but for his own legacy, a legacy that felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Courage, he called, though the word felt hollow. Each syllable echoed like a ghost taunting him. Courage when men fell like brittle leaves in autumn, when fear gripped their throats like an iron vice. I could see it in the faces of his soldiers, eyes wide with horror, heartbeats racing faster than time itself. I felt their collective heartbeat, a desperate pulse that spoke of a shared destiny, a future uncertain. And then, the unthinkable happened. A scream cut through the tumult, a raw, primal sound that chilled me to my core. Etienne was down, his golden eyes now dimmed, his body sprawled upon the earth like a fallen star. The world around me froze. Time stretched thin, the moments elongating into eternity. I felt tears prick my eyes, a sharp pain pierced through me. He had fought so fiercely, so bravely, only to be snuffed out like a candle in the wind. I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but the sound was trapped in my chest. In that very moment, King Jean caught sight of his fallen knight, and I saw something shift within him. A flicker of fear turned into an inferno of rage, a hurricane of emotion that swept through his being like a tempest. He charged forth, drawn toward Etienne's lifeless form as if the very fates were pulling him into the abyss. No, he roared, a primal sound that shook the very air. I will not lose any more. But the battle raged on, relentless, cruel, as if mocking his despair. As I watched him fight his way through the fray, I saw ghosts in every clash of steel, faces of fallen comrades, brothers, and sons, all etched into the fabric of his torment. Each swing of his sword sent ripples through my soul. I felt the weight of history pressing down upon us, heavy and suffocating. This was not merely a battle for land, it was a reckoning, a moment that would define the ages. And just as despair threatened to engulf the battlefield, the twists of fate conspired against him. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in the dark garb of the enemy, a mere silhouette against the chaos. I could sense the shifting tides of fortune, the looming spectre of destiny. It was like watching a game of chess unfold, where every move could lead to victory or ruin. In that terrifying moment, the challenge seemed insurmountable, yet the flicker of something greater ignited within me. I wanted to believe, to cling to hope, even as the darkness whispered of surrender. But surrender was never an option, not for Etienne, not for King Jean. Their spirits melded within me, a testament to the resilience of the human heart, even when faced with the abyss. As the clash of swords rang in my ears, I felt time slip away, the universe folding in on itself. Every breath became a prayer, a plea for survival. In the chaos of it all, I was no longer a mere observer, I became part of the tapestry, woven into the fabric of this moment. The Battle of Poitiers was not just a clash of arms, but a testament to the tenacity of the human spirit, a chaotic dance of hope and despair that would linger long after the last blow was struck. And even as the world spun into darkness, I could feel the weight of the cosmos pressing down upon us, the stars above bearing witness to our struggles, to our triumphs, and to the undeniable truth that history is carved in the blood of the brave. This was not the end, it was merely a prelude to the story that would echo through the ages, a tale of sacrifice, of love, and of the unyielding heart that refuses to bow down. In the mud, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear, I can hear the distant thrum of drums beating like a heart, my heart, faster, louder. The chill of dawn creeps through the trees, wrapping around us like a ghost, whispering promises of glory intertwined with death. I stand shoulder to shoulder with men who had families, dreams, laughter echoing in their minds like old songs, yet here we are, swords gleaming under a sullen sky, waiting, always waiting. I remember the night before. The fires crackled, sending shadows dancing across weary faces, their eyes reflecting unspoken dread. Men brought forth their fears in drunken murmurs, and laughter cracked like thin ice, a fragile shield against the encroaching void. A knight named William, his armor dented but his spirit unyielding, had sung a ballad, his voice rough as gravel but warm as the sun. I can still hear it, echoes of bravado mingling with the knowledge that tomorrow might swallow us whole. If I fall, he had said, let my ghost haunt the battlefield, ready to drag anyone who dares tread upon my grave. His laughter was infectious then, but now it wraps around me like a shroud. And then there is Edward, the boy with eyes too wide for such a dark place. He had left a girl in England, Mary, with her golden hair and laughter like church bells. I saw him clutching a locket, fingers trembling as he whispered her name into the night, that simple syllable heavy with longing. I'll come back to you, love, he murmured. But now, I see the terror flickering in his gaze, the knowledge that promises can turn to dust in the blink of an eye. The sun, a pale spectre, rises slowly, revealing a battlefield that feels more like hell. The ground is a slick mess of mud and blood, churned by thousands of feet, yet it is the hearts of men that quake the most. A cacophony of voices rises, a storm of uncertainty that rattles my bones. Are we fools to rise against such odds? A vast French army, their banners snapping defiantly in the wind, looming like a wall of thunderous wrath. And then it begins. A single horn pierces the air, sharp and cold, awakening the ghosts of our pasts. The sound ignites a fire within me, a desperate urgency that pushes me forward. I grip my bow, the wood smooth and familiar, like an old friend. I remember the lessons in the woods, the way my fingers danced along the string, the thrill of hitting a target, a fleeting moment of joy now overshadowed by the reality of this day. A battle is more than a clash of steel, it's an orchestra of fear and valor, and I am just a note, trembling on the edge of silence. The first arrows fly, slicing through the air like whispers of fate, and I release mine, watching it soar, each heartbeat sinking with its flight. I can feel the weight of my own breath, a reminder that I am alive, that I still have a choice. But choice is an illusion here. I see Edward beside me, eyes wide, breath hitching, and in that moment, I realize he is not ready. He's not prepared for the onslaught of sound and fury, the way the ground shakes beneath the weight of humanity's darkest desires. Stay close! I shout, but my words get lost, swallowed by the chaos. The French charge forward, a tide of armor and fury, and behind them, I see their faces, twisted in grim determination. They are not merely soldiers, they are fathers, brothers, sons. They, too, carry the burdens of love and loss. In their eyes, I see a reflection of our own fears, our own hopes, mingling in a grotesque dance. The clash of swords erupts, a symphony of metal on metal, each strike a heartbeat, each scream an echo of torment. I dodge, weave, and fire, the world narrowing to the pull of my bowstring, the grit of the mud beneath my feet, the cries of my comrades blending into a terrifying chorus. The rain begins to fall, soft at first, then heavy, drenching us, washing away the pretense of glory, revealing the rawness of our humanity. I see William, his laughter extinguished, replaced by the grim reality of battle. He falls, a shadow collapsing into the earth, a ghost amid the living. A scream escapes my lips, I shoot again, my arrow finding its mark, but the victory feels hollow, a mere echo of what it means to be alive. Each fallen man is a universe lost, a story unfinished, and yet the battle rages on, relentless, cruel. Edward is beside me again, tears mingling with rain, a boy lost in a world that demands a man. He fires his bow, hands shaking, and I want to tell him to stop, that this isn't what he dreamed of by the fireside, but the words die on my tongue. Instead, I reach for him, pulling him close, urging him to find strength in this chaos, to remember the laughter that had brought us here, not just the fear. Then, a moment of stillness, time holding its breath. I look into his eyes and see the reflection of the stars we once gazed at together, the vastness of dreams. But this is no place for dreams, here, the cosmos watches with cold indifference. The tide shifts as the French line falters, and we push forward, a wave of determination crashing against despair. I feel an electric thrill, but it is laced with disbelief. How can we, so few, stand against so many? And then there it is, the clash again, the screams, the shadows of men rising and falling like autumn leaves. I fire again and again, each release a prayer, a plea. I remember why we fight, the flickering flame of hope against the dark abyss. William may be gone, but his laughter fills the silence, and Edward's tears become the anthem of our resilience. This is not a victory, it is survival wrapped in the shroud of loss. Each moment stretches into infinity, a swirling dance of life and death, and I am caught in the eye of the storm. I look around, the battlefield a tapestry woven from dreams and nightmares, each thread a life snuffed out, a story left untold. I do not know what will come next. The sun breaks through the clouds, illuminating the chaos, and for a heartbeat, the world stands still. I breathe in the damp earth, the metallic taste of blood, the salt of tears mingling with rain. The clash of swords continues, a heart beating against the encroaching dark, and I find myself lost in the moment, a fleeting fragment of humanity against the eternal. This battle, this fight for survival, is more than just a moment in time. It is a dance, a struggle between light and darkness, a reminder that in the chaos, we find ourselves. Life pulses around me, and I stand, an unwilling hero amidst the storm, ready to face whatever the cosmos has in store, unyielding, unbroken. The echoes of the past intertwine with the present, and I am here, alive, fighting for tomorrow. The air crackled with tension, an electric charge that sent shivers racing down spines. The sun hung low, a blood-orange orb casting long, grotesque shadows on a battered battlefield where the stench of smoke and sweat mingled in a grotesque embrace. A horn blared, a shriek that pierced the silence, and suddenly, chaos erupted like a dam breaking. Bodies surged forward, a living tide of fear and wrath. In that moment, there was Jan, a soldier with hands that trembled not from cowardice but from the weight of his own beliefs. He was a man torn, caught between the fervent cries of his brethren demanding justice, and the haunting whispers of doubt that gnawed at his conscience. He remembered the old church where he once knelt, praying for peace, for salvation. Now, here he was, the altar replaced with the blood-soaked earth of Kutnahora. I remember the hymns, he thought, how they soothed me once, but now they feel like a taunt. And there was Katerina, watching from the rear, her heart hammering in her chest. She clutched a dagger, her father's dagger, its hilt worn smooth from years of use. She remembered the warmth of his hand on her shoulder, the way he'd laugh as he told her stories of bravery, of battles fought for righteousness. But was it righteousness, or vengeance? The question echoed in her mind as she watched the sparks of conflict ignite around her. She felt the weight of expectation press down, expected to be the fierce lioness, but inside, she felt like a rabbit caught in the merciless gaze of a wolf. Across the field, the clatter of armor and the clash of steel rang out, mingling with the cries of the fallen. They were not mere men and women, they were mothers, fathers, children of God caught in a whirlwind of despair and ambition. And in the chaos, a figure emerged, Zygmunt, the would-be king, his eyes ablaze with fervor, a man fueled by a distorted vision of divinity. "We are the true believers," he shouted, his voice rising above the cacophony, drenched in fervent zeal. Yet to Jan, Zygmunt was a ghost of madness, a spectre promising salvation but delivering only bloodshed. Is this what faith has wrought? Jan murmured to himself, the dagger of doubt twisting painfully in his gut. Shadows danced across his mind, memories of a time before this madness. He could almost hear the laughter of his sister, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through their tiny home. How had it come to this? The thought clawed at him like a ravenous wolf, gnawing away at the vestiges of hope. As arrows rained down like a storm of needles, Katerina felt the world shift around her, time bending, pulse quickening. She was not simply a spectator, she was the daughter of the man who had sacrificed everything. "I will not be a ghost," she whispered, a fierce oath to herself, gripping the hilt of her father's dagger until her knuckles turned white. Each heartbeat was a battle cry, each breath a reminder of what was at stake. She could feel the ancestral shadows gathering around her, the weight of expectation heavy but exhilarating. "Look at them!" Zygmunt boomed, rallying his followers, his voice splintering the air, driving them forward into the fray. "They fight for a lie, for a church that has forgotten its flock. We fight for the truth." The fervor ignited in his followers, thousands of hearts pounding in sync, a symphony of chaos, while Jan stood frozen in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, caught in the undertow of his own resolve. Then came the first clash, the sound of metal against metal ringing like the chimes of a cruel clock. counting down the seconds until the world would change, forever. Jan lurched forward, a soldier once, now merely a pawn in a game of faith and fury. He swung his sword, feeling the weight lift just as the horror settled in. He was fighting not for glory, but for survival. Am I a monster now, he thought, every swing of his blade a question, every life taken a prayer lost to the void. Katerina surged into the fray, a whirlwind of defiance and rage. Her heart thundered like the war drums echoing in the distance. She felt the energy of the crowd, their fear, their resolve, but beneath it all, she sensed the undercurrent of something more sinister, a pulse of desperation. It's not just about faith, she whispered to herself, slicing through the chaos. It's about power. She caught a glimpse of Zygmunt, and in that moment, an understanding settled like dust in her heart. She was fighting for a cause, yes, but she was also fighting against a man who could burn the world down to feed his own ambition. The air thickened with the cries of the wounded, the smell of iron mingling with the despair that seeped into the ground. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity, and as Jan fell to his knees, surrounded by the wreckage of humanity, he looked up to see Katerina fighting beside him. Their eyes locked, a fleeting moment, a shared understanding igniting like a spark in the dark. We are not monsters, he wanted to shout, but the words caught in his throat, drowning in the chaos. We are survivors, Katerina breathed, her voice barely carrying over the din, but it reached him nonetheless. Whatever this is, whatever they say it is, we must endure. And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield into an eerie twilight, they found a fragile connection, a tether amidst the chaos. The battle raged on, but the shadows grew longer, whispering secrets of tomorrow, of the haunting echoes of faith, hope, and the relentless thirst for power. They were trapped in a cycle, and with every swing of a sword, every cry raised to the heavens, the weight of their choices pressed down harder. Time twisted and turned, moments stretching into infinity as the horizon burned, like a promise unfulfilled. Jan and Katerina stood together, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of conflict, facing not just an enemy, but the ghosts of their own making. In the battleground of faith and betrayal, the fight was far from over. The dawn would bring with it new horrors, new decisions, and the haunting question that loomed like the specter of a clock ticking away the last moments of their humanity. Snowflakes fall like silent witnesses, coating the blood-soaked earth of Totan in an eerie blanket of white. The air is sharp, biting down to the bone, and the hushed whispers of the dying sun meld with the distant clash of steel. It smells of sweat and fear, the metallic tang mingling with the faint scent of burnt wood and something more primal, a fear. I stand there, heart pounding, as if the ground beneath me bristles with the ghosts of fallen soldiers, each step a reminder of what awaits. I remember Thomas, his auburn hair wild as his spirit, laughing through the chaos, even as the shadows of men sharpened into the distinct forms of enemies. Come, let them come, he'd shouted, a reckless grin splitting his face. I'll meet them blade to blade. But here we are, knee-deep in the icy embrace of fate, and laughter feels like a distant memory. His bravado now seems foolish as I grip the hilt of my sword, knuckles white against the leather. I can still hear the echo of his voice, a haunting melody cut short too soon. I remember the day we set out from York, the sun shining high, blinding in its innocence. I was just a lad then, naive to the cruelty of men, to the fickle nature of loyalty. This is for our future, Thomas had declared, his voice booming, igniting a fire in the hearts of those around him. How easily we dreamt back then. How easily we believed. Yet here I stand, the weight of that dream pressing down like the snow, suffocating and cold. And there's Eleanor, her spirit a fierce flame that burned through the shadows of the castle. She fought for the roses on the white banner like a lioness defending her young. To fight for the Yorks is to fight for a future, a promise she had pledged with a fire in her eyes that could ignite the night. She stood at the edge of our camp, sword raised, unyielding, until the day the news of her brother's death tore through her like a dagger. Her laughter faded, replaced by a haunting silence, her heart cloaked in a shroud of grief. I can still see the night she looked at me, eyes glistening. What future do we hold when the ones we love slip through our fingers? Now, as the armies gather, their banners fluttering like dark omens against the stark sky, I sense the pulse of impending doom. The ground trembles beneath heavy boots, the air thick with a tension that feels almost sentient. I can hear the battle cries rising like a chorus of damned souls, mingling with the cold wind that howls through the trees, each gust a reminder of the lives at stake. The very fabric of time and fate feels woven into this moment, a tapestry stained red, echoing with the weight of history. I remember the first clash, the sound of metal biting into flesh, the guttural cries that tore through the air like a dark symphony. I was there, lost in the whirlwind, my heart racing as I swung my sword, feeling the life bleed out from beneath my feet. And amidst it all, I caught a glimpse of Thomas, charging forward, a wild spirit against a sea of death. He fell, not far from me, eyes wide in shock, as if the very world around him betrayed him in an instant. I froze in that moment, time stretching into eternity. No! I screamed, the sound strangled in my throat. I stumbled forward, the weight of despair heavy on my chest as I fought against the tide of bodies, against the chaos that clawed at my sanity. Eleanor was there too, her fierce heart now tempered with the weight of loss. I remember the way she gripped her sword, knuckles white as she cut through the lines, tears intermingling with the harshness of battle. She was a tempest unleashed, but the storm inside her raged even fiercer. For York, she screamed, voice choked with grief and defiance. But as she felled an enemy, a shadow flickered across her face, a ghost of the brother she had lost, a reminder of the price we all paid for this ambition. I remember moments of stillness in the cacophony, where time felt suspended, the world around me blurring into a haze of rage and despair. I looked into the eyes of the men I fought, saw their fear and desperation mirrored in my own. They were fathers, brothers, sons, mere shadows of what they could have been, united by a cause yet divided by blood. And in that fleeting eternity, I felt the weight of choices made, of destinies entwined, each moment a thread in a tapestry woven from the fabric of regret. The sun hung low, bleeding its final light into the horizon as the day wore on, the battlefield transformed into a hellscape of mud and crimson. I fought on, driven by a mix of desperation and the memory of laughter, of Thomas charging bravely, of Eleanor's fierce hope. Each swing of the sword became a prayer, each cry a lament. I could taste the salt of tears on my lips, the acrid smoke of war filling my lungs, and I wondered what God watched from above, indifferent to our plight. Yet even in this darkest hour, in the depths of anguish, I felt a flicker of defiance. We were alive, bound together by this chaotic dance of war, and I would fight for Thomas, for Eleanor, for every soul lost under this merciless sky. The world spun around me, chaos reigning supreme, but I held my ground, heart pounding, breath ragged, as the snow continued to fall, a ghostly witness to the bloodbath unfolding beneath it. And in that moment, as night began to weave its dark tapestry, I realized we were no longer just fighting for a throne, for power or glory. We were fighting for each other, for the essence of what it meant to be human. In this madness, amidst the cries of the dying and the clash of metal, we were still here, still alive, echoing the stories of those who had come before us. I remember, and I will remember forever. Blood stains the cobblestone streets, a dark reminder of the storm brewing on the horizon. The air hangs heavy, thick with the scent of sweat and fear as panic gnaws at the hearts of men. I remember the clash of steel and the distant roar of cannons, an unsettling lullaby of death that serenades the dying city. Each echo pierces the night like a dagger, sending shivers through the living, the ghosts of the past, and the hopes for tomorrow. I found myself standing at the crumbling walls, trembling, as the stars above flickered like the last breaths of the dying. This was not just a city, this was a heart, a soul, a fortress that had stood against time itself. The weight of its history pressed down on me, a suffocating blanket of grief. In that moment, I could almost hear the whispers of emperors long gone, their visions now fading into shadows. Constantine XI, a man carved from the stone of his ancestors, stood amid the chaos, his face a mask of resolve mingled with despair. His heart raced, matched only by the relentless pounding of the cannons outside. They were coming, the Ottomans, waves of humanity crashing against the remnants of his empire like a tide threatening to swallow everything in its path. He had always been the protector, but now he felt like a crumbling statue. "I cannot let this be the end," he murmured, the words barely escaping his lips, heavy with the weight of the world. And then there was Elena, a woman forged in the fires of loss and survival, weaving through the alleys as if caught in a tempest. Her eyes, fiery and fierce, mirrored the flame of her spirit, yet beneath that bravado lay an aching sorrow. She clutched a small bundle, a child, innocent and unaware of the impending doom that loomed like a dark cloud overhead. She remembered the laughter that once filled her home, now replaced by the hollow echoes of despair. "I will not let them take you," she whispered to the child, her voice a battle cry against fate. The sun sank lower, casting an eerie orange glow across the skyline. Shadows danced like phantoms, teasing the edges of reality. I remember the moment when the first wave of soldiers surged forward, a mass of confusion and determination. The cries of the dying rang out, mingling with the thunderous cannon fire, a symphony of destruction. The city's heart beat in sync with the chaos, thrumming with the rhythm of fear and hopelessness. In the midst of the chaos, the air crackled with tension. Constantine rallied his troops, his voice a beacon in the storm. "For our city, for our future," he cried, but doubt flickered in his eyes like a candle about to snuff out. He felt the weight of each life resting on his shoulders, each face a reminder of what was at stake. Behind him, the fearsome shadow of Mehmet II loomed, a relentless figure driven by ambition and a thirst for conquest. I could feel the tension between them, a charged line drawn in the sand, the inevitable clash of destinies. Elena was not idle. She fought through the crowd, clutching her child tightly, a lioness protecting her cub. Every step was a battle, every glance over her shoulder a reminder of the chaos unraveling behind her. Stay close," she whispered, her heart racing, the world around her dissolving into a blur of screams and violence. I could feel her desperation, a tangible force that pulled at my very core. As the gates of Constantinople shuddered under the weight of the assault, I could hear the whispers of the past. "What is left when the walls fall?" I thought, the question echoing in my mind like a haunting refrain. The city had seen centuries of glory, and now it stood on the brink of annihilation. Memories flickered like candle flames, illuminating faces of emperors and saints, the laughter of children, the embrace of lovers. "Stand firm!" Constantine shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. The soldiers, weary and blooded, rallied around him, a final spark of hope igniting amidst the despair. Yet, as I watched, I sensed the shadows creeping closer, tangible and suffocating. A moment of clarity washed over me. This was not just a battle for a city, it was a battle for the soul of humanity itself, a struggle against the relentless march of time. And then, the moment came, the clash of steel against steel erupting like a storm unleashed. The gates shattered, and with it, the fragile hope of a people. I could feel the collective gasp, the breath of a city held hostage, waiting for the inevitable. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears, a countdown to destiny. Elena stood frozen, the chaos swirling around her like a tempest. She felt the fabric of her life unraveling, a tapestry of dreams fraying at the edges. "I will not lose you," she sobbed, clutching the child tighter, as if that alone could shield them from the storm. Constantine faced the oncoming tide, the weight of 1,000 years pressing down upon him. His heart thundered, the pulse of a kingdom echoing in his chest. "For honor, for the people," he cried, but the words hung heavy in the air, like the last flicker of a dying star. As the first screams pierced the night, I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. This was not just a city falling, this was a world crumbling into dust. The walls that had stood for centuries were now echoes in the wind, whispers carried off into the abyss. The clash surged forward, and I was swept into the chaos, an unwilling witness to the agony of a people who had loved, fought, and bled for their home. The screams of the fallen mingled with the laughter of the victorious, a haunting cacophony that echoed through time, a reminder of the fragility of life. And within that swirling storm, between the chaos and the heartbreak, a question lingered: what becomes of dreams when the walls come tumbling down? The sun hung low over Castellón, a bruised orange swelling against the horizon, casting shadows as dark as the hearts of men. I stood among the thrumming chaos, the air thick with sweat, fear, and the coppery scent of blood yet to spill. The distant rumble of cannon fire echoed like thunder rolling in from an unseen storm, and I felt every tremor in my bones, every heartbeat a countdown to the irrevocable. I remember the way the wind whispered through the trees, a ghostly lament that seemed to say, "Prepare yourself, for this is a reckoning." Jack, a soldier with mud-streaked cheeks and a haunted gaze, stood beside me, gripping his spear like it was the only tether to his sanity. He was young, perhaps too young for the blooded path he had chosen, yet here he was, eyes wide with a cocktail of fear and desperate hope. The war had twisted him, it had taken his laughter and left behind a ghost. I caught his eye and saw something flicker, a memory of childhood, of running through fields of wildflowers, untouched by the cruel hands of fate. But that innocence was gone now, buried beneath layers of urgency and despair. "I hear the cannon," he said, voice trembling like a leaf in autumn. "Do you think it will be today? Will it end today?" His words cut through the tension, raw and unfiltered, a question asked not just of the battle, but of all the loss that had led us here. The weight of his query hung in the air, as if the very earth was poised for an answer. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that things could change, that perhaps this was all just a nightmare. But instead, my throat tightened, and I could only nod, knowing full well that hope had become a fragile thing, easily shattered on the battlefield. Across the field, the French banners fluttered defiantly against the sky, their colors vibrant, a stark contrast to the grime and decay that defined our lives. They were not just flags, they were symbols of defiance, of an identity forged in fire, and they stirred something within me, a fierce pride that threatened to ignite the smoldering embers of my fear. Then there was Eleanor, a fierce woman with wild hair and eyes that sparkled like the stars above, but her gaze was heavy with the weight of loss, of a brother whose laughter had been silenced forever by this relentless war. I had seen her charge into the fray, wielding her sword with such grace it was as though she danced with the Reaper himself. She was a force of nature, a tempest in the storm, yet here, in this moment, she stood still, her breath shallow and uneven. "Do you think he's watching?" she whispered, her voice laced with a tremor that betrayed her brave facade. I could see the way she clenched her fists, the desire to fight it all, every injustice, every moment of anguish. She needed vindication, a reckoning, but here, now, it felt as if we were all prisoners to a fate written in blood. "I remember when he laughed," I replied, the weight of nostalgia pressing against my chest. "I remember how the sun seemed to shine just a little brighter on those days." The memory was a fragile thing, slipping through my fingers like sand, and I wished I could gather it all back, the laughter, the warmth, the promises of a future untainted by the horrors around us. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched longer, creeping closer like the inevitability of death itself. The air thickened with tension, I felt it crawl over my skin, a visceral reminder that nothing was certain. The world had become a twisted tapestry of pain, woven with threads of bravery and despair. And then it happened. A thunderous blast shook the very ground beneath us, and the cannon's roar reverberated through the valley, a harbinger of chaos. I watched as men fell like autumn leaves, bodies crumpling, faces twisted in grimaces of disbelief. The battlefield became a tapestry of chaos, each life a thread in a larger, darker design, and I felt the weight of it all crush against my chest until I could scarcely breathe. It was a symphony of suffering, each note more haunting than the last. Jack's grip tightened on his spear, knuckles white with determination as he howled, "For France!" It was an invocation, a prayer to the gods of war, and I could see the fire ignite in his eyes, a desperate desire to transform fear into fury. But fear is a cunning beast, it lurks, waits for the moment of vulnerability, and then strikes. I could see it clawing at the edges of his resolve. "Stay close!" I shouted, my voice barely cutting through the cacophony around us. But the din grew, a cacophony of metal on metal, the cries of the wounded piercing through the smoke-stung air like arrows of anguish. I felt the world narrow down to this moment, the cannon fire, the shouts, the heartbeats of men fighting for a future that felt ever more elusive. Eleanor surged forward, her sword raised, glinting in the fading light, and I felt the world around me blur. I saw her dive into the fray, a spirit unbound, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was chasing shadows. I wanted to follow her, but a haunting realization gripped me, perhaps the battle was already lost. Perhaps hope was merely a flickering candle in a storm, fragile, beautiful, but always destined to be snuffed out. And then, through the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Jacques charging forward, propelled by a mix of fear and anger, his figure illuminated by the fiery glow of cannon fire. I felt a jolt, a deep-seated urge to scream, to pull him back from the brink, but the words lodged in my throat, heavy with futility. I remember, the echoes of voices around me morphed into whispers, the ghosts of those who had come before, lost in the churn of history, drawing me deeper into the tumult. I remember, I thought, the memories and hopes colliding into a storm of emotion. And in that moment, as the battle raged on, I felt the world shift, the cosmos aligning against a backdrop of chaos, as if time itself held its breath, waiting to see who would emerge from the shadows. Was it bravery or madness that drove us forward? I didn't know. All I felt was the raw, gnawing uncertainty that clung to us like the stench of death. This was more than a fight for territory, it was a struggle for souls, a clash of dreams and nightmares, a final crescendo of the 100 Years' War, a battle that would leave scars etched in the hearts of families, a haunting reminder of what it meant to be human. And as I stood there, amidst the cacophony of anguish and valor, I couldn't help but wonder, in this symphony of chaos, who would remember our names? Who would remember us? The answer lurked in the shadows, just beyond our reach, as we danced on the precipice of oblivion. The air crackled with a tension so thick it suffocated the very sound of battle. Darkness draped over the city of Nancy like a shroud, the moon a cruel voyeur peeking through a veil of clouds. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth, I remember the pounding in my chest like a war drum calling soldiers to their doom. The crack of hooves against the cobblestones echoed through the streets, a distant prelude to chaos. Eustache de Neufchâtel stood at the edge of the battlefield, a spectre caught between fear and duty, his heart pounding like a caged beast. He gripped his sword so tightly that his knuckles turned white, a futile attempt at stability in a world spiraling out of control. The cries of his men reached him, a chorus of desperation and valor mingling in the air, their voices rising like smoke from a pyre. They were counting on him, and he was counting on something, anything, to stave off the inevitable tide that threatened to engulf them all. Across the battlefield, the figure of Charles the Bold loomed, a monstrous shadow of ambition and fury, as if the very ground quaked beneath the weight of his desperation. He was a man who wore his power like armor, but beneath that facade lay a heart aching for recognition, for validation. He envisioned a kingdom forged in blood, yet the steel that defined his reign was now turned against him. The dreams of a greater Burgundy shimmered like mirages in the distance, receding with each failed campaign, each loss that echoed through the corridors of his ambition. Eustache! A voice, raw with urgency, pierced through the tumult. It was Jean, his childhood friend, eyes wide and frantic, a wild spark of life fighting to hold back the encroaching darkness. We have to retreat. The enemy, no. Eustache's voice was a thunderclap, breaking through the wind that threatened to carry him away. He could feel the weight of his men behind him, their silent pleas weaving through his thoughts like threads of a tapestry. We cannot abandon this ground. Not now. But the shadows whispered of betrayal and despair, curling around them like smoke, and for every heartbeat that passed, Eustache felt the ground slip further away from his grasp. Memories flooded his mind, laughter shared, dreams spoken under starry skies, promises made over cups of watered-down wine, all of it drowned in the bitter tide of impending loss. Jean's face twisted with anguish. Eustache, think of your family. Think of your wife. Each word struck like a dagger, lodged deep in Eustache's resolve, but still he stood firm, heart racing against the inevitable. The ghosts of his ancestors loomed, whispering half-formed thoughts of bravery and honor, but their voices seemed so distant now, like echoes from a fading dream. The distant clash of swords rang out, a haunting symphony of metal and flesh. Every strike reverberated through the earth, a reminder that they were all but pawns in a game played by forces greater than themselves. Eustache felt the air grow heavier, the scent of blood mixing with the acrid smell of sweat and fear. Each inhalation was a labor, each exhalation a prayer. Then, as if time itself had conspired against him, the enemy surged forth like a tide, ravenous, relentless. A wave of color and chaos, their banners snapping and twisting in the chill of the night, daring him to falter, to yield. Eustache's heart thundered, a wild beast trapped beneath the weight of destiny. He could hear the call of his men, their voices rising and falling like a tide as they charged into the fray, hope clinging to their souls. And then there was a flash of steel, a glint that caught the moonlight and turned it to silver. Eustache's world shrank to the point of his sword, a narrow tunnel where fear and determination converged. He lunged forward, thrusting through the chaos, each swing a desperate plea for survival, for victory that tasted bittersweet on his lips. But the battlefield was a merciless teacher. For each man he felled, a dozen more seemed to rise, as if the earth itself had birthed them from its loamy depths. He felt the stab of despair claw at his insides as he glimpsed Charles in the distance, a king on the brink of ruin, his eyes burning with a fierce light that threatened to consume everything in its path. Eustache blinked, and suddenly he was there, face to face with the embodiment of ambition gone awry. The air shimmered between them, thick with the ghosts of their choices, the weight of their paths colliding like titans. Both men, bound by ambition, yet shackled by the same tragic flaw, the unyielding desire to conquer. "Why, Eustache?" Charles spat, his voice a hiss carried by the night wind. "Why stand against me? We could be rulers together." But Eustache saw not a ruler, but a fallen star, a man who had reached too far into the cosmos, only to plummet to earth. "I fight for my people," he shouted back, words raw and jagged, as if he were carving them into the very air around him. "Not for a dream that crushes the lives of others." The battlefield roared with the clash of wills, and in that moment, the weight of the world bore down upon them, blooded ground, shattered dreams, flickering hopes. Each soldier a reflection of their own humanity, caught between glory and despair. Then came the sound, an unmistakable crack, like thunder, shattering the night, a harbinger of fate as Charles fell, not to glory but to the very darkness he sought to conquer. The earth swallowed his ambition whole, and Eustache felt the world begin to shift beneath his feet, the tide turning, a new dawn creeping over the horizon. The light was cold and unfeeling, yet it beckoned with the promise of an uncertain future. With each breath, the echoes of the battle hung heavy in the air, a haunting reminder that victory often danced hand in hand with loss, that dreams of power could unravel into nightmares. Eustache stood amidst the remnants of a shattered ambition, heart heavy, spirit torn. The battle was not just a clash of steel, but a reflection of the human condition, a pursuit of something greater, marred by the shadows of regret and the weight of choices made. As dawn broke, illuminating the remnants of chaos, the weight of history pressed down upon him like a cloak, wrapping him in the sorrow of what had been lost. The battle was over, but the echoes would resonate forever, haunting him in the quiet moments that followed, the laughter of friends, the cries of the fallen, the bittersweet taste of victory. As he gazed over the battlefield, Eustache felt the tug of the future, uncertain yet inevitable. The shadows of ambition lingered, as did the ghosts of the past, intertwining in a delicate dance that would shape the fabric of history. The world was changing, and he was left standing, heart pounding, world spinning, a fragile soul caught in the relentless tide of time. The sun hung low in the sky, a fiery orb bleeding its last light into the dusty streets of Granada. I remember the scent of smoke, the acrid tang of burning wood, mingled with the sweetness of oranges that clung stubbornly to the trees, defiant in the face of doom. It was a day like no other, the air taut, electric with tension. An entire city held its breath, caught in the throes of a relentless siege. Outside the crumbling walls, the clatter of steel echoed ominously, a death knell for dreams woven into the very fabric of this land. I remember the moment when the gates shuddered. The sound was like a groan from the earth itself, deep and resonant. Inside, Isabella watched, her heart pounding against her ribs. Queen, warrior, mother, the titles weighed heavily on her shoulders. She stood on the parapet, her dark hair whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon where the banners of Castile flapped like vultures circling overhead. Each flutter was a reminder of what she had sacrificed, each gust of wind whispered secrets of blood and betrayal. And then there was Boabdil, the young king, a boy trapped in a man's body, caught between duty and despair. I remember his face, pale as the moon, eyes wide with fear and regret. He wandered the halls of the Alhambra, once a jewel of splendor, now suffocated by shadows. His dreams of glory had turned to ash, and with each passing day, he felt the walls closing in, the whispers of his ancestors clawing at his sanity. "Is it too late?" he often asked the ghosts that lingered in the corners, his voice trembling like a candle flame in the wind. The nights were the worst. I remember the silence, thick and oppressive, broken only by the distant cries of the wounded. Each moment stretched like a tightrope, balancing hope and despair. The city was alive with ghosts, spirits of those who had fought, bled, and died for a kingdom slipping through their fingers. They thrummed in the air, a palpable energy that made the heart race. Isabella felt them too, an army of memories marching beside her, a chorus of loss that echoed through the empty streets. The day arrived when the sun shattered the horizon with a golden blaze, painting the world in hues of fire. Isabella knew this would be the day, the moment that marked the end or the beginning. She felt it in her bones, a shiver that coursed through her veins like ice. "This is for them," she whispered to herself, thinking of the lives that had been lost, of children who would never see the dawn again. Her heart ached with the weight of her resolve. "I will not let their sacrifices be in vain." As the conquistadors advanced, swords glinting in the light, her heart raced. She turned to her advisors, seeking reassurance, but found only despair reflected in their eyes. "We fight not just for land, but for our souls," she declared, a fierce flame igniting within her. Her voice rang out, cutting through the murmur of fear, igniting a flicker of hope within the hearts of those around her. Meanwhile, Bobdil stood on the verge of the battlements, staring out at the sea of soldiers below. The weight of his ancestors' expectations bore down on him, suffocating. "For your honor," he murmured, but his voice was a ghost, lost in the chaos that consumed him. The faces of his people swirled before him, fierce mothers, brave fathers, children with eyes wide in wonder. "I am their king," he thought, a hollow declaration that echoed in the vastness of his mind. But what kind of king was he, trapped in the throes of fear? The clash of metal rang through the air, a cacophony of chaos that shook the very walls to their core. I remember the screams, raw, visceral sounds that lashed at the heart, a siren's wail through the turbulent ether. Isabella fought like a lioness, the blade in her hand a part of her, blooded and fierce. With every swing, she carved out her fury, her fear, her resolve. She was not just a queen, she was a thunderstorm unleashed upon her enemies, a tempest of wrath and sorrow. But Bobdil faltered. I remember the moment his gaze fell upon the blood-soaked ground, his mind spiraling into a void of despair. "What have I done?" he whispered, realizing the price of his inaction. The weight of the world pressed down upon him, suffocating. He watched his people fall, one by one, their lives extinguished like flickering candles in a tempest. He felt their pain, their anger, their hope slipping through his fingers. In that moment, he was both king and coward, the burden of leadership threatening to crush him entirely. "Is this my legacy?" he asked the darkened sky, but the heavens offered no solace. Instead, the wind howled, a cruel reminder of fate's unyielding grip. Isabella's battle cry pierced through the din, a siren song beckoning him back from the precipice. In that clash of wills, the very fabric of their destinies entwined. And then came the moment that changed everything. Isabella stood on the threshold, heart racing, sword raised high, eyes ablaze with a fierce light. Bobdil, trembling, stepped forward, feeling the heat of her resolve as it pulsed through the air. Together, she shouted, a command that cracked the very sky, as if the cosmos itself held its breath. With a final, desperate breath, Bobdil found his voice. Together, he echoed, a fragile promise that trembled between them, as the armies converged in a whirl of chaos, light, and shadow. This was not merely a battle, it was a reckoning, a clash of dreams and nightmares, of blood and honor. As the dust settled and the echoes of violence danced in the air, the ghosts of Granada stirred, their whispers mingling with the cries of the living. The city would never be the same, it was a tapestry woven of triumph and tragedy, eternally bound in the struggle for identity. In the heart of this maelstrom, Isabella and Bobdil stood on the precipice, both leaders yet lost souls, bound by the choices that had led them here. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that entwined around them, and in that fleeting moment, the weight of history bore down, heavy and unyielding. And as night fell, the stars blinked into existence, indifferent to the turmoil below, each one a distant reminder of dreams yet to be forged, of destinies still unfolding in the shadows of Granada's legacy. The chill of dawn wrapped itself around Stirling, a ghostly shroud that whispered secrets of blood and valor. The air crackled with tension, a breath held at the precipice of chaos. I can still hear the resonance of clanging swords and the distant cries of men, their desperation mingling with the sharp scent of damp earth and wet steel. Beneath the shadows of looming mountains, two forces were poised for the dance of death, an unpredictable ballet of courage and fear. I was there, heart pounding, a spectator yet a participant, feeling the pulse of history thrum through my veins. William Wallace stood at the riverbank, a titan carved from the very stone of Scotland. His frame, a sinewy blend of fury and resolve, radiated an energy that made the air shiver. I remember the way his eyes, fierce and wild, scanned the horizon, searching for an enemy that could taste the smoke of his vengeance. He was not merely a man, he was a storm, a tempest brewing in the quiet. Today, he had declared, we fight not just for Scotland but for our very souls. I remember the faces of the men behind him, each one a tapestry woven from dreams of freedom, each heartbeat a defiance against oppression. There was Malky, a boy not yet a man, his cheeks still bearing the softness of youth. His hands trembled as he clutched a sword too heavy for his shoulders, yet his eyes held a fire that could ignite the night. He glanced at Wallace, gauging the fervor in his leader's spirit, his own doubts flickering like distant stars. "What if we fail?" Malky whispered, a plea wrapped in a shroud of terror. "Failure is not in our blood," Wallace replied, his voice as firm as the ground beneath their feet. "We will carve our place in history, or we will carve our names on the stones of this land." Across the river, the English army loomed like a black cloud, a harbinger of doom. They were well-fed, well-armed, and wielded the confidence of their king's might. But this day, they would learn that valor cannot be quantified by numbers alone. The river, the swirling waters that separated two worlds, danced with anticipation, reflecting the sky's bruised hues. The silence before the storm hung thick, punctuated only by the rustle of tunics and the muffled prayers of men ready to embrace their fate. Here, loyalty wrestled with fear, and the weight of history pressed down upon shoulders already burdened with the expectation of a nation. I felt it, the raw energy vibrating through the air, electrifying yet terrifying. Then came the moment that shattered the stillness, an arrow, swift and merciless, sliced through the air, its trajectory a grim harbinger of what was to come. It struck a man near the front, and time seemed to fracture. The cry that erupted from his lips was a harrowing note that rang through the crowd, a reminder that courage and death walk hand in hand. And then, chaos unfurled like a dark flag on the battlefield. Wallace surged forward, a whirl of motion, his battle cry echoing off the riverbanks, "For Scotland!" His voice pierced the veil of fear, igniting a flame within his men. Malky surged alongside him, propelled by a blend of dread and exhilaration. I remember his face, a mask of youthful determination, as he charged, sword raised high, the sun glinting off steel, an angel or a demon, depending on which way the wind would blow. The clash was thunderous, a cacophony of iron and flesh, screams mingling with the roar of the river. Each swing of the sword, each gasp of breath, sent shockwaves through the very fabric of their existence. I felt it, the sweat on my brow, the grit of the earth beneath my nails, the knowledge that the very essence of life hung in the balance. Every heartbeat was a drum, every cry a symphony of agony and triumph. Wallace fought with a ferocity that seemed to summon the ghosts of 1,000 ancestors, each one whispering their strength into his veins. I remember the dance of his sword, the way it arced and fell, a beautiful yet devastating choreography. He was no longer just a man, he was a conduit for the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. But amidst the frenzy, Malky faltered, fear creeping in like a thief in the night. He stumbled, watching a comrade fall, blood painting the earth red, a stark contrast to the rich greens of the grass. "What if I fail?" he thought, panic clawing at his insides. "Fight, lad!" Wallace roared, catching Malky's gaze. "Remember why we stand. Remember the dreams they want to crush." That moment, the glint of conviction, the raw urgency in Wallace's voice, transformed Malky's fear into resolve. He charged again, the weight of his sword feeling lighter, buoyed by the flames of purpose. Each swing felt like a piece of his heart, a piece of his country, lost yet found in the chaos. As the battle raged, the bridge became a grim theater, a stage where the fates of men intertwined, each man a thread in a larger tapestry of struggle. I could feel the collective heartbeat of the warriors, a pulse that throbbed with pain and glory. Wallace, relentless, pushed forward, the river now running red, a bittersweet tribute to those who fought and fell. Victory was a cruel mistress, and as the last echoes of combat faded into a haunting silence, Wallace stood, blooded yet unbowed, amidst the wreckage of swords and dreams. He looked out over the remnants of the English forces, their retreat an act of desperation. The tide had turned. Malky, breathless, stood beside him, the boy transformed into something fierce and unwavering. In that moment, joy surged through me like a wild river, mingling with the sorrow of loss. They had defied an empire, yet the cost lingered heavy on their hearts. I remember the bittersweet taste of triumph, the bittersweet knowledge that victory always comes at a price. I wanted to scream, to sing the praises of their courage, to weave their names into the very fabric of the cosmos. The echoes of their battle would resonate through time, a reminder that courage, even when steeped in fear, can alter the course of history. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the battlefield, I knew that this day would be remembered, not just in tales of honor, but in the hearts of all who dared to dream, a dream that still flickered like a candle against the darkness. The cycle of conflict never truly ends, it merely changes shape. As I stood there, the ghosts of Stirling whispered their secrets, their burdens a part of my very being. The next battle was already forming on the horizon, the shadows hinting at futures yet unwritten. The heart of Scotland beat on, echoing through the ages, collecting dreams like fallen leaves in the wind. The sun was a dying ember, slumping low on the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like spectres over the battlefield. I can still hear the clamor of hooves on the ground, the cries of men lost in the chaos of battle, and that chilling silence that settled when hope fled. They say it was the last crusade, but it felt more like a funeral procession, a dirge sung by the crows circling above. That was Nicopolis in 1396, a place where dreams tangled with nightmares, where valor and folly met an unspeakable fate. I remember the moment the smell of blood hit me, sharp and metallic, mingling with the distant scent of smoke. It was like waking from a dream only to find yourself in a waking nightmare. My heart raced, thump, 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 against the fear gripping my chest as if it were a vice. I glanced at my brother, Philip, his face pale and set, eyes shimmering with both dread and unyielding resolve. This was his crusade, he wore that burden-like armor, thick and heavy, forged from the stories of our forefathers who had once fought for glory. But what was glory now? It felt like a ghost, a whisper of a time when hope glimmered brighter than steel. "Brother, stay close," I urged, trying to find certainty in the chaos swirling around us. But Philip was already lost in the throng, swept away by voices calling for valiant deeds and eternal honor. The clashing swords, the cries for blood, they wrapped around him like a shroud, pulling him deeper into the fray. I wanted to shout, to pull him back, but fear knotted my throat. Instead, I clenched my fists, feeling the coarse grip of the hilt against my palm, a desperate tether to this world. Across the field, a knight stood towering, his glinting armor catching the last rays of the sun. His name was Sigismund, a king donning the weight of a crown, striding through the chaos with an air of authority that felt fragile, like glass on the brink of shattering. I saw him rallying the men, igniting a fervor that felt more like an invocation of madness than a call to arms. The stories that surrounded him were intoxicating. This was the man who would lead us to victory, to salvation. But salvation never felt so far away, did it? Victory or death, he roared, and the men echoed it, their voices mingling into a cacophony of desperation. I could see Philip caught in the tide, swept along with the fervor. His eyes shone with ambition, yet I could see the flicker of doubt beneath the surface, like a candle fighting against the encroaching dark. "Philip!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the swell, the tide of battle pulling us apart. And then, time warped around me. It felt as if the world held its breath, a fleeting moment suspended in the air. I could hear the grinding gears of fate turning, feel the universe exhaling, as if it knew the calamity that was to unfold. The trumpets pierced the air, sounding the charge, and it was as if the ground itself shuddered beneath our feet. I remember the first clash, the steel meeting steel. The shock reverberated through me, sending shivers down my spine. I watched men lose their lives in front of my eyes, their faces contorted in agony, their cries piercing the very fabric of my soul. I felt the heat of their blood splattering, the visceral reality of this glory painting the ground beneath me. Each scream echoed within me, a haunting reminder that valor often masqueraded as madness. "Fight for your lives, brothers!" Sigismund's voice rang out, but what did it mean to fight when death loomed so close? I looked at Philip again, his once boyish face now hardened, alive with the spark of war, yet marked by shadows. Was that fear or elation? I wasn't sure which terrified me more. The sun sunk lower, casting an eerie glow. The shadows stretched longer, distorting the very lines between life and death. The battle became a tapestry woven with threads of pain, fear, and fleeting moments of overwhelming courage. I swung my sword, the weight of it anchoring me in this madness, and with each strike, I felt a piece of myself slip away, a fragment lost to the hunger of war. "Look out!" The warning came too late. I turned just in time to see Philip's face contort in pain, an enemy's blade piercing through the fabric of his dreams. Time froze again, and the world around me faded into a haunting silence. I rushed to him, heart pounding, breath coming in gasps. "No, no, brother! Not like this!" My hands trembled as I grasped him, the warmth of his life seeping away like water through fingers. His eyes, once so full of hope, now clouded over, searching for something beyond this realm. I felt the ground shift beneath me, reality crumbling as his breath became a whisper. "I fought for us, for the future," he murmured, and in those moments, I realized there was no future here, only echoes of dreams shattered against the unforgiving stone of this battlefield. The weight of his words crushed me, heavy as lead, filling the air with a sorrow that felt as vast as the cosmos. And there, as the battle raged on around us, I understood the truth. The last crusade was not about glory, not about the honor of kings or the valor of knights. It was about the inevitable tragedy that follows when men chase after ghosts, when ambition blinds them to the very lives they hold dear. In that moment of despair, everything faded, the sounds, the colors, even the very essence of time. It was just me and Philip, suspended in an abyss of grief, and I was powerless to stop the darkness from closing in. The air felt thick, as if the universe itself held its breath, and I knew this was just a beginning, a cruel twist in a story that would never find closure. The shadows grew longer, and the cries of the fallen mingled with the piercing silence of loss, an echo that would haunt the corridors of my memory forever. And amidst that chaos, I realized that the battle was never just about the clash of swords. It was about the heart, the fragile essence of being human in a world driven to madness. As the stars began to blink awake in the night sky, I saw the ghosts of the fallen rising among them, whispering tales of valor and despair. As dawn approached, a new day unfurling its cruel wings, the battle continued, and with it, the agony of being alive amid the ashes of dreams lost in the dark. The clanging of metal against metal echoes through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, a discordant symphony that heralds both doom and glory. I stand amidst the chaos, the tang of sweat and blood thick in the air, a palpable tension that prickles at my skin. Each breath feels like a fragile thread, teetering on the edge of unraveling. Above us, the sun hangs low, a cruel observer witnessing our descent into madness. Somewhere, a woman screams. The sound chills me to the bone, clawing at my heart. I can't help but remember her face, twisted in anguish, the face of my sister, perhaps, or a neighbor, the face of any woman snatched from the embrace of safety, pulled into the dark maw of this chaos. I shake my head. Focus! In the shadows, a figure emerges, Godfrey of Bouillon, his armor gleaming like a beacon against the backdrop of despair. He strides through the carnage with purpose, yet his eyes betray an internal battle, a man torn between duty and the weight of blood on his hands. He is a warrior, yes, but he is also haunted, a man who once dreamed of honor but now grapples with the grotesque reality of conquest, the screams of the dying, the stench of charred flesh. "I remember when I imagined glory," he whispers, his voice barely rising above the carnage. "I thought it would taste like wine, sweet and rich. But here, it tastes like ash." A shiver runs through me at his words. I can see the ghosts of those he's lost lingering in the corners of his mind. They are a crowd of accusing faces, restless phantoms demanding justice, demanding peace. And then, there's my own heart, filled with the heavy weight of betrayal. I am not a soldier, not a hero, but a historian, a chronicler destined to bear witness to this brutal symphony. My quill is inadequate, my ink, black with guilt and horror. I remember, yes, I remember when I chose to follow the tides of war, to forsake the quiet life for this cacophony of chaos. I thought I would find purpose, but all I found was an echoing void. The siege stretches on, each day a relentless cycle of hope and despair. I see the city's walls, scarred and battered, looming over us like a great titan, refusing to bow even as we hurl our fury against it. But with each failed attempt, the stakes rise. A fleeting moment of silence grips the crowd, a collective inhale as we watch a line of soldiers fall under the weight of the stone and fire. I feel something crack within me, an understanding that we are not just fighting for land, but for something much more elusive. Our humanity. And then, amidst the swirling dust and chaos, I find myself drawn to a figure in the distance. A young boy, no older than 10, gazes at the carnage with wide, unblinking eyes. His innocence pierces me like a dagger, a reminder of what we are destroying. What words can I offer him? What solace can I provide? He is a casualty of my obsession, a reflection of our shared folly. I want to reach out, to tell him that this is not the world he deserves, that we are more than soldiers or historians, we are humans. But before I can take a step, the tension snaps like a taut string. A sudden rush of soldiers surges forward, driven by desperation or perhaps madness. Godfrey is among them, his blade singing a cruel lullaby as it slices through the air. The boy watches, unflinching, as death dances before him. In that moment, I see his future unfurl, years of hatred, a cycle of vengeance that will stretch beyond our lifetimes. My heart aches for him, for all of us caught in this relentless tide. Around me, the cries of the fallen rise, weaving an intricate tapestry of loss. I can't escape the weight of it. Each name, each face, a reminder that for every victory, there is a price to pay. The city, once a sanctuary, has become a grave, and we are its mourners. And then, the walls crumble. A roar erupts as the chaos spills into the streets, a tidal wave of bloodlust and desperation. I am swept away, a leaf caught in a storm. The taste of iron fills my mouth as I stumble, falling into the embrace of the crowd, bodies colliding in a chaotic ballet. In the thick of it all, I catch a glimpse of Godfrey, his armor stained and battered, a lion among sheep. Yet, even as they cheer his name, I see the shadows creeping deeper into his eyes. The exhilaration of conquest has turned to ash in his mouth. I wish I could tell him, you are not the monster they believe you to be, Godfrey. You fight for a dream that is slipping through your fingers. But words fail me. Instead, I grasp the quill, the ink spilling forth like blood, chronicling this horror as it unfurls. I am an unwilling witness, yet I cannot turn away. The boy is still there, watching, and I realize he sees through me, through us all. He is the very embodiment of our loss, the truth we wish to bury beneath layers of glory and conquest. And as the sun dips below the horizon, casting a crimson hue over the ruins, I know this battle is more than a clash of swords, it is a battle against our own souls. It is a reckoning. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and sorrow, and still, the city stands defiant, a ghost harboring memories of what once was and what will never be again. I remember the laughter of children echoing through these streets, I remember the warmth of hope, but now? Now, all that remains is this blood-soaked canvas upon which we paint our darkest dreams. And so, the night swallows us whole, a cloak of darkness draping over the fallen and the conquerors alike. The world is a silent observer, the stars above indifferent to the plight of men. We are but shadows against the vast backdrop of time, and as the siege continues, I feel the weight of history pressing down upon us, binding us in its relentless grip. We are lost, yet somehow, we march onward, driven by a need we cannot understand, a hunger for something we cannot name. And what remains when the dust settles? What whispers will echo through these walls when the last cry fades? I shudder at the thought, yet I forge on, trapped in this cycle, haunted by the very essence of our humanity.